"Don't argue with my wife in her house," my son roared, jabbing a finger at my face in the very kitchen where I'd laid every tile with my own cracked hands. My daughter-in-law stood there with her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her lips, watching as my own flesh and blood humiliated me in front of her. I stepped back, my heart going numb in that instant. I didn't shed another tear. I quietly changed every lock in the house, each little click like a silent oath that no one would cross this threshold without my say-so again. In less than an hour, the pounding and screaming started. My son lost control, shouting my name in desperation. My daughter-in-law sobbed, hurled her phone, and in the middle of the night there was nothing left but endless pleading. I sat in the dark, a cold cup of tea in my hand, listening to each knock on the door as if it were rapping on my own past. The house was silent, save for the tick of an old clock and the patter of rain on the eaves. I've lived in this house for 30 years, every brick underfoot, every brush stroke on the walls, every hint of apple pie in the kitchen holds a lifetime's breath. And now, this very place has become where I was shamed by the son I raised. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I, Loretta Wynn, 69, a widow in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. My late husband Calvin and I built this house with sweat, tears, and every dollar we scraped together doing jobs no one wanted. Calvin was a mason. I did laundry for families nearby. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. Calvin always said, "Loretta, this house will be your legacy. If I'm ever gone, you'll still have a place to come home to." I believed that for half my life. I remember every detail, the first bricks Calvin set by sunset light, the nights I stayed up mending clothes, counting every dollar to pay for materials. When he died in a work accident, I swore I wouldn't let this house fall into someone else's hands. Yet now, a single sentence from our son made me feel like a stranger in the very home I built with my own sweat. That kitchen where Darren just screamed used to be where I baked his first birthday cake. As a boy, he'd sit on the counter, legs swinging, waiting for me to pull the cake from the oven. He used to say, "Mom, when I'm big, I'll build you a really big kitchen." Now, he's not only forgotten that promise, he treats this kitchen as someone else's house. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, stood with her arms crossed like a victorious queen. She came into my son's life 3 years ago, and from that day on, everything in this house started changing. She said the wall paint was too gloomy, the curtains tacky, and the old photos of me and Calvin carried bad energy. I laughed at first, thinking she wanted to help. But I realized what Rebecca wanted wasn't to help, it was to take over bit by bit, from the kitchen, to the living room, to my son's heart. I kept quiet. Quiet when she replaced every piece of furniture without asking. Quiet when she took down our family photos and put up only their wedding pictures. Quiet even when she invited friends over for parties and left me to sit alone in my room, listening to laughter echo through the house. I thought silence would bring peace. I was wrong. People say silence in the face of disrespect isn't kindness, it's handing someone the right to hurt you. That morning, it started with a few rose bushes. I'd grown those roses for 15 years, each one a memory of Calvin and me. Rebecca decided they blocked the view of her new coffee machine. When I gently said the spot she wanted would get no sun and the roses would die, she shrugged. "Then buy new ones." "Everything old should be replaced, Mom." Before I could speak, Darren snapped his newspaper shut, voice sharp. "Rebecca's right. Stop giving her a hard time." "This house is hers too." I stood still. Just one line, hers too, was enough to make me face what I didn't want to admit. I hadn't been treated like the owner for a long time. I was just a guest in the very home I'd bled for. I tried to stay calm. "Just ask me first before changing anything in the house, please." That's when Darren shouted the words that changed my life. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." I looked at my son, the boy I stayed up all night sewing his graduation gown for, the boy I sold my only sewing machine to cover his tuition, now telling me I had no rights in my own home. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply stepped back and took one last look around the kitchen. Every tile, every wooden cabinet is a mark of love, labor, and my life. When they left, I opened a drawer and pulled out a bundle of old papers wrapped in plastic. The deed, my name, Loretta Wynne, printed clearly. I wiped the dust from the corner and laid it flat on the table, a reminder that I hadn't lost my rights. I'd just forgotten I had the right to stand up. I called Earl, an old friend who worked construction with my husband. "Earl, you still doing locksmith work?" "Sure, Loretta. You lose a key?" "No," I said slowly. "I want every lock changed. Front door, back door, and the shed, as soon as possible." He chuckled over the phone. "Planning to kick someone out?" I answered, oddly calm. "No, Earl. I'm just taking back my own space." When he came, I held the flashlight, passed him screws, and steadied the doors. With each click of a new lock, I felt lighter, like each turn was sealing away shame and hurt and opening a new chapter for me. After Earl left, I poured myself a hot cup of tea and sat at the table. The light fell through the window onto the worn wood Calvin had built. I rested my hand on it and whispered, "Calvin, don't worry. I'm still here, and no one is taking this place from me." I stood and checked each lock again, touching every door as if I were touching the house's N. Outside, the streetlights lit the yard, and rain began to fall. When the clock struck 12 a.m., a car stopped at the gate. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Then the banging started, frantic and chaotic, and Darren shouted, "Mom, open the door! What are you doing?" Rebecca screamed too. "Are you crazy? This is our house!" I stayed seated, listening to them the way you listen to a storm pass. Darren pounded, then pleaded, then yelled. Rebecca cried and begged, her voice cracking. The knocks turned into punches, then slowed, then stopped. I didn't say a word. I just took my final sip of tea, tasting the bitterness laced with the sweetness of release. That night, they were on the outside, and I was inside my own home. And I knew that when they woke up somewhere unfamiliar in the morning, they would understand. Sometimes a mother's silence isn't forgiveness, it's the beginning of consequences. When the knocking finally faded, I sat in the soft yellow light, hollowed out yet strangely at peace. Memories rushed back, as if the house itself were whispering its story. I remember the day I set foot in Richmond, nearly 45 years ago. I was just past 20, clutching 2 old suitcases, a little boy on my hip, and a heart full of dreams. I was born in a poor town in southern Georgia, where women spent their lives doing odd jobs and raising kids. I didn't want my future boxed into ash-gray kitchens and pitying looks. I wanted a real home, a place that was mine, where no one could say get out just because I was poor. Calvin, my husband, was quiet, gentle, with strong hands and the eyes of a man who knew how to dream big. We met at church one fall Sunday. He told me, "Loretta, if you believe, we'll build something no one can take." And I did. I believed in him and in myself. Those early years were brutal. Calvin hauled loads on job sites. I took in laundry at a small shop in the black neighborhood. The pay was tiny, but we saved every dollar. By day, I stood 10 hours over tubs of soapy water, my hands raw and swollen. By night, I mended clothes to make a few more bucks. Some nights, we'd count pennies at the table, laughing while we dreamed about a small piece of land of our own. One June morning, Calvin came home with his eyes shining. "They're selling a vacant lot near the old creek. $3,000. If we push hard, we can buy it." I laughed. $3,000 then felt like $3 million, but I looked at him and said, "We'll make it." From then on, we worked like time was running out. Calvin took night shifts. I woke at 4 a.m. to bake pies for the flea market. The first apple pies were burnt, but folks got used to me. Every time I sold a batch, I tucked the money into a tin box under the mattress, our dream box. 3 years later, we paid in full. The little patch sat at the city's edge, nothing but weeds and rocks, but to me it was heaven. Calvin stood in the middle, took my hand and said, "Loretta, this is where we'll grow old together." We started building the house with our own hands. No crew, just love and grit. I mixed cement. Calvin set each brick. Every afternoon, as the sun tilted low, I brought him water and wiped the sweat from his brow. He'd smile and say, "This house will have your soul in every brick." We lived in a metal shed nearly 5 years to save for materials. On rainy nights, water blew in through the seams. I held the boys close, listening to thunder, still feeling warm inside, because I knew we were building our dream, bit by bit. Then the house was finished. Not big, not fancy, but solid and full of love. 2 small bedrooms, a red brick kitchen, and a west-facing porch where the sunset poured soft gold. I planted roses along the fence. Calvin built a wooden swing for the boys. Every evening we sat there, listened to the radio, ate pie, and talked about the future. Those years were the best of my life. Then the accident came. One morning, while I was hanging laundry, the site manager came with the news. Calvin fell from the scaffold. I remember the towel dropping from my hands, my knees buckling. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The house we built suddenly felt hollow enough to choke me. All I had left were 2 sons, Darren at 15, Noah at 12. I had to be strong. There was no one else. I tucked Calvin's wedding band into a little wooden box and stood up. From that day, I was both mother and father. I took more work, laundry, cooking, babysitting for neighbors. Some days my hands bled from bleach, my back screamed. But when I heard my boys laughing inside, the pain melted away. Darren was bright and studious. He wanted to be an engineer, said he'd build Mom another house, bigger this time. I remember the day he ran home waving his college acceptance letter, eyes shining. "Mom, I did it." I smiled, but my throat tightened. We didn't have the money. I looked at my old sewing machine, my companion for years, and knew what I had to do. I sold it to a neighbor for exactly $1,000. It covered Darren's first semester tuition. That night, after I handed it over, I sat alone, staring at the empty spot on the table, listening to rain on the window. But thinking of my son's dream, I told myself, no sacrifice is meaningless if it lets a child take flight. I taught my boys what I've believed all my life: honesty, gratitude, and respect. I told them, when you're wealthy, remember to nod to the street sweeper. When you succeed, don't forget the hands that carried you through hunger. Darren grew up just like he dreamed he became an engineer. On the day he wore his cap and gown, I sat in the back row, crying and clapping at the same time, filled with a pride I can't describe. I thought, Calvin, do you see this? Our son did it. And Noah, the younger one, trained in computer technology. He doesn't talk much, but always looks out for his mother. Every weekend he brings flowers, fixes a light bulb, changes a pipe. Every time I look at my 2 boys, I think all my hardships were worth it. This house, small as it is, raised all 3 of us. It's not just a shelter. It's a witness to love, persistence, and dignity. Every crack in the wall is the mark of time. Every brick is a reminder. I was once poor, once grieving, but I never broke. I think if Calvin were alive, he'd be so proud. Because this house doesn't stand firm just because of cement and brick, but because of something stronger, the unyielding will of a woman who refuses to be stepped on. I looked around the kitchen, the place where that shout, "Her house," still echoed. I gently laid my hand on the tabletop, the wood worn smooth by years. I whispered, as if to the one who's gone, "Calvin, do you see? They forgot who built this place. But I'll make them remember. Not with anger, but with clarity and self-respect. I sighed softly and looked out the window. The roses by the porch were still blooming, fragile but stubborn. I understood they're like me. You can move them, trample them, but give them a little light and they'll rise, more beautiful than ever. This house was once built by my calloused hands, and now it will be the place where I rebuild myself. If anyone asked me when the roof started turning cold, I'd say, the day Rebecca walked in. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca Moore, 35, divorced, an accountant at a construction company in Richmond. The first day Darren brought her home, I saw something you can't hide in someone's eyes, a cold calculation wrapped in perfect sweetness. She walked into my home with just enough smiles, a soft voice, and compliments that sounded real but were hollow. "Oh, it's so cozy, Mrs. Loretta. Your apple pie smells amazing. Just like Christmas when I was little." But when her eyes scanned the room from the floral curtains I sewed, the old photo frames, to the rug Calvin once picked, I saw a quiet disdain. That look said more than words. Old. Tacky. Not worthy of me. Darren, of course, didn't notice. He looked at her the way a man in love does, like the whole world had shrunk to the woman standing there. I kept calm. I smiled, brought out pie, poured them tea. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, maybe she was just out of place. But then Rebecca chuckled and said to Darren, "Babe, this place is cute, but so small. If we repaint and change the curtains, it'll look much brighter." I heard it clearly, but still smiled. "Feel free when you two have your own place. You can paint to your heart's content. Here, everything's already familiar to me." Rebecca shrugged, sipped her tea, then gave Darren a meaningful look. I knew, from that second, the stranger had started marking territory. 3 months later, Darren announced the wedding. I was happy, truly happy. Every mother wants her child to be happy, and I'm no different. I picked out white fabric and sewed Darren a shirt myself, and I tucked $3,000, my entire rainy day savings, into an envelope as their wedding gift. Darren hugged me and thanked me, but Rebecca only smiled and said lightly, "Thanks, Mom. We'll use it to pay for the reception. We didn't really need you to cover anything, but hey, if it makes you feel included." It sounded polite, but it sank my heart. Not because of the money, but because of the way she said, "If it makes you feel included." I nodded and stayed quiet. I told myself, "It's fine. Your son's getting married, you have to be generous." After the wedding, they said they'd stay a few months to save for a house. I agreed right away. I thought the house was big enough, and having young people around might be nice. I even prepared a room for them, cleared a closet, washed the linens till they smelled fresh, and hung an extra wedding photo of theirs on the wall. I wanted Rebecca to feel welcome. I know being a daughter-in-law in someone else's home is never easy. I didn't realize those few months would open the door for a quiet storm that would tear through my home. On the first day they moved in, Rebecca arrived with a whole truckload of furniture. She came in directing Darren to shift the sofa, move the dining table, then said, "This corner needs a mirror. The light will bounce and make the room feel bigger." I watched in silence as Calvin's old armchair was pushed out onto the porch. Our wedding photo was moved to the bottom shelf, replaced by their large, glossy wedding portrait. I said nothing. I didn't want to start life together with an argument. But inside I heard Calvin whisper, "Loretta, they're taking what's yours piece by piece." A week later, I came home from work to find the floral curtains I sewed swapped out for a cold olive green. She spoke gently. "I think this color fits better, more modern, more elegant. Don't you like it, Mom?" I answered, "If someone had asked me first, I might like it more." Rebecca gave a thin smile. "I'm just trying to make you happy." "Didn't think you'd be so sensitive." Darren heard and jumped in right away. "She's only helping, Mom. Don't be so strict." That felt like a tiny knife sliding a little deeper. From then on, I felt myself slowly being pushed out of the owner's seat. One weekend afternoon, I came home from the market and found the house full of strangers. Laughter everywhere, the smell of perfume and liquor flooding the living room. Rebecca was hosting a party with her friends. They filled every chair, ate cake from my pantry, drank coffee out of my commemorative cups, the ones I only use on Thanksgiving. I paused in the doorway. Rebecca smiled and called out, "Oh, Mom, you're back!" "I invited a few friends over, hope you don't mind." I forced a smile. "No, just a bit surprised." One of her friends muttered, loud enough for me to hear, "This place has a nice vintage vibe, but it definitely needs work," Rebecca answered without lowering her voice. "Yeah, I think so too. Once we've saved enough, we'll remodel." I heard every bit of that we. This house, the one I built with Calvin, where I raised my sons, was now being talked about like it belonged to them. After that, I learned Rebecca wasn't here to stay for a while. She was here to take over. It started small. She swapped dishes, moved the altar, added flashy throw pillows. Then even my daily routines were disrupted. In the mornings, I'd get up early to make coffee, only to find Rebecca had used up all the hot water. She'd shower for ages, singing like she was on stage. When I mentioned it, Darren just chuckled. "Mom, Rebecca's job is stressful, let her relax." At night, I'd turn on my usual news program. Rebecca grabbed the remote and switched to a drama. "Mom, this show won an Emmy. You should watch it instead of those depressing news segments." I stayed quiet. I didn't want to turn my home into a battlefield. But silence is its own kind of pain. Once, Noah, the younger one, stopped by, and the moment he walked in, asked softly, "Mom, why does the living room look so different?" I just said, "Rebecca likes it that way." Noah looked around and murmured, "But this is your house." I smiled sadly. "Sometimes people forget that, son." One evening, while I set the table, Rebecca said to Darren, "I'm inviting coworkers over tomorrow night. Mom won't mind, right?" Then she turned to me, her voice sweet but fake. "Mom, I want everyone to see our beautiful house." I set the spoon down and looked straight at her. "Our house?" Rebecca gave a little laugh. "I mean, our home. We all live here." Darren squeezed her hand and said, "Mom, don't get hung up on words. Rebecca just has a different way of saying things. She truly loves you." I looked at the two of them and felt like I was standing between two worlds, one I built with blood and one that was pretending its way in, inch by inch. I didn't argue or scold. I just cleared the dishes, wiped the table, and told myself, people can take your seat, but they can't take your memories. What I didn't know was that Rebecca didn't just want a seat. She wanted the right to rule. And Darren, the son I thought would protect me, was helping her do it without even realizing. Those little phrases, "Don't be strict, Mom," "She's only trying to help, you need to adapt," each one was a small cut, slicing into the heart of a mother who gave up everything. I began to feel like a lost guest in the very home I built. And deep down, I knew. The storm hadn't stopped, it was just starting. Some mornings I'd wake up, walk into the kitchen, and need a few seconds to realize I was standing in my own house. Everything familiar had been distorted. The wooden dining table Calvin made was replaced with cold stone, the soft floral curtains swapped for trendy ash gray. The family photos I'd hung for more than 20 years were gone, replaced by shiny wedding portraits of Rebecca and Darren, smiling those empty smiles. I stood there, like someone lost in the place that used to be my breath. Rebecca ran everything without even trying to hide it. She decided the meals, the schedule, the very rhythm of the house. I used to wake at 5:30 a.m. to make coffee and water the plants, but now, the moment my footsteps sounded, Rebecca would open her door with a frown. "Could you wait until 7? "I need a little more sleep." I nodded and went back to my room, throat tight. In this house, I no longer had the right to rise early. At lunch, she swapped in unfamiliar dishes, salads, salmon, dark bread. I still cooked the traditional meals, pot roast or beans, but Rebecca always made a face. "Those are so greasy, Mom. Nobody eats like that anymore." Darren sat silent, nodding like it made perfect sense. I was slowly pushed out of the kitchen, the little world that was once mine. Rebecca said, "Mom, let me cook. I don't want you getting tired." But really, she didn't want me in her space. I stood in the doorway and watched her open cabinets, move bowls, rearrange the spice jars I'd labeled by hand. Everything got relabeled, reorganized, Rebecca's way. I no longer knew where the salt was. I couldn't even recognize the scents I used to know by heart. My kitchen, the one where I cooked for my husband and sons for decades, felt like a strange room in my own house. The living room wasn't mine anymore either. Rebecca started inviting friends every weekend, loud music, laughter filling the house. I usually sat in the corner chair to read, but she would say lightly, "Mom, could you go walk in the garden for a bit? I need space to host." One March afternoon, when the cold wind still slipped through the window frames, I heard her say it again, sugar on her voice, ice in her tone. I didn't answer. I closed my book gently, set it on the table, and put on my coat to head outside. I sat on the steps and looked through the fogged-up window. Inside, they laughed and raised glasses, as if I were a boarder and not the owner. The room's light bounced off the mirror, and I caught my reflection, a silver-haired woman, small, hands trembling, pushed to the margins of her own life. On my 69th birthday, I thought at least Darren would remember. Every year he got me a cake, even just a small one from the corner shop. But that year I waited all morning, no one said a word. That evening Rebecca said, "Are you free tonight, Mom? We'll take you to dinner." I smiled a little. Late as it was, my heart warmed. But when the car stopped, I went cold. It was a cheap diner on the corner, the kind of place people eat quickly, not somewhere you celebrate a birthday. They ordered 2 meatloaf plates and 1 salad. The bill was a little over $20. Rebecca chatted through the meal. Darren kept glancing at his phone. No cake, no candles, no birthday wishes. On the way home, she whispered to her husband, thinking I couldn't hear. "At least the obligation's done." That sentence slid into me like a cold knife. I stayed quiet all night. No tears, just my heart pulling tight, shrinking like a candle's flame about to go out. Darren started feeling like a stranger. He stopped asking if I was well, if I needed anything from the market. When I reached to help him mend a shirt, he said, "No need, Mom, Rebecca can sew." When I cooked his favorite dish, he ate only a few bites, then said, "I'm used to eating light now." "Don't go to the trouble, Mom." I looked at him, searching for myself in his eyes, and found only a cold emptiness. The boy who once hugged me and cried when his father died now spoke to me like I was a stranger. I used to think a mother's love could never fade. Turns out, if someone is shrewd enough, they can make a child believe his own mother is a burden. Rebecca didn't need to shout or argue. She just wore me down, bit by bit, until I backed out of everything on my own. I started eating alone. Their dinner was after 7 p.m., and I ate early so I wouldn't be in the way. Rebecca said, "Don't wait, Mom. I'll cook later for Darren." Then she made 2 separate portions and set the table with only 2 plates. I used to sit at the head of the table, where Calvin once sat across from me. Now that chair was always cleared away and replaced with a vase of flowers. I moved to the corner chair, ate quietly, and listened to them talk like a soundtrack that wasn't meant for me. Some days, when they had guests and I stepped out, Rebecca smiled. "Mom, why don't you get some fresh air in the garden? It's loud in here." I understood what she meant. I withdrew, like a housemaid who knows her place. Outside it was cold. I sat under the porch, listening to the wind whistle through the fence, watching the light spill from the house I used to call home. I missed Calvin so much it hurt. If he were alive, he would never let me go through this. But I also know if he were here, he'd say, "Loretta, don't let anyone take your dignity from you, not even your son. In all that loss, only the little garden was still mine. I tended the 15-year-old rosebush's flowers I planted for Calvin. Every morning before sunrise, I walked out with my old watering can, touching each bloom like I was touching a piece of memory. Every plant had its own story. The first one I planted on our 10th anniversary, a deep blood red. The second bloomed for the first time the year Calvin died. I called it Hope. Those pots were my friends, a reminder that life still lived in me, even as everything in this house withered. Rebecca didn't like the garden. She said the roses were an eyesore and a mess to clean. I just smiled. They're my friends. When there's no one left to talk to, I still have them. She shrugged and turned away, not bothering to hide her disgust, but I didn't need her to understand. I only needed that little garden where every rose knew I still existed. Sometimes Noah stopped by. He sensed the change, even though I said nothing. "Mom, you look thinner," he said, sadness flickering in his eyes. I only smiled. "I'm fine. Just a little tired from the weather." He looked around, noticed Calvin's photo was gone from the wall, and frowned slightly. "Why don't I see Dad's picture anymore?" I answered softly, "Rebecca likes things simple." I put it in my room. Noah was quiet for a long moment, then said quietly, "I don't like the way they treat you." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, everything will have to change, sooner or later." Every night, when they went upstairs, I sat alone by the window, watching moonlight fall across the garden. I heard the wind in the roses, as if Calvin were speaking to me. "You're still as strong as ever, Loretta." I nodded gently. Yes, I was still strong. But I also knew that if I kept staying silent, one day I'd disappear not from this house but from my own life, and I swore that would never happen. That day began like any other, quiet, damp, and carrying a hollow I couldn't name. I didn't know that within a few hours everything would change for good. I stepped into the garden at first light, old watering can in hand, ready to tend the rose bushes I'd cared for 15 years. The whole yard was still soaked with dew. The air was cool, the scent of blossoms faint and clean. The roses were in perfect bloom, fresh and bright red, as if trying to survive in a home that was slowly no longer mine. But when I reached the fence, my heart seized. All the rose pots were gone. Where they had stood, the place where Calvin once sat fixing a pipe, where I watched the sunrise, was empty. A few petals were scattered on the ground, bruised from being dragged. I rushed around the yard. Then I saw them crammed into a dark corner behind the garage where sunlight never reached. Right beside them sat a brand new coffee machine, its cord dangling like an intruder staking a claim. Rebecca stood there in a cream robe, a coffee cup in hand, sipping casually like she'd just done the right thing. I asked quietly, as calmly as I could, "Rebecca, who moved these rose pots?" She didn't look at me. "I did. This corner's more convenient. If we put the coffee machine in the sun, it'll break." I looked around the place where the roses used to catch morning light, where Calvin and I sat after long days. I kept my voice gentle. "They need Sunday. Here, they'll die." Rebecca turned, her eyes cold as steel. "They're just pots of flowers, Mom. You're overthinking, and this spot works better." "This is my house, too." I froze. "My house, too." The words landed clean and sharp, like a blade cutting off what little memory I had left. I looked around the brick wall Calvin built, the porch he fixed, the paint I brushed on myself, all of it now treated like shared property by someone who'd been here less than 3 years. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Rebecca, I didn't finish." Darren stepped out from the house. He'd heard bits of it and frowned. "What now? Mom, you're upset again?" I turned to explain, "I'm just saying the roses shouldn't be in the dark." "They'll die, Darren." But before I could say more, Rebecca raised her voice. "I only wanted to tidy things up, but your mom won't get it. She always thinks I'm ruining everything." I looked at my son, the one I loved, cared for, and protected all my life. Instead of listening, he slammed his hand on the patio table, his voice dropping like a stone. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." I went numb. Her house. I stared at Darren for a long time and saw clearly. The boy who used to kiss my forehead every night before bed was now a stranger, defending his wife by tearing his mother's heart open in front of someone else. I said nothing. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I quietly walked back into the house, through a living room, now full of things that held none of my memories. My heart wasn't racing with anger, it was filled with something else. Clarity. When they left, I stood a long time before the mirror in my bedroom. The face staring back showed my years, but the eyes were no longer weak. I realized I had given and kept giving until I lost myself. I opened the closet and took out an old leather bag. Inside were the house papers I'd guarded for years like treasure. On the yellowing page, my name was still there, clear and unblurred. By time, Loretta YNN, legal owner. I laid my hand over that line, as if touching my own life. I whispered, "This isn't her house. It's mine. It's Calvin's. It's made of years of sweat and tears." I went to the landline and dialed a number I'd known for decades, Earl Henderson, my husband's old friend, now a locksmith. "Earl, are you still working?" I asked. His voice was warm as ever. "I am." "What's wrong, lock jammed?" I smiled slightly. "No, Earl. I want them all changed. Front door, back door, the shed, and the gate. As soon as possible." He was quiet for a few seconds, then said softly, "Mrs. Loretta, what happened?" I only said, "Nothing. I just want my house back." 2 hours later, Earl arrived. He looked around at the house, unfamiliar and full of new things, and let out a small sigh. "You kept the rose garden?" I smiled sadly. "They were just moved, but tomorrow they'll be back." While he worked, the clink of metal echoed in steady beats, click, clack, turn like a new heartbeat for the house. I sat at the window watching him swap out each lock as the late light washed the room in gold. Every changed lock felt like a turn of fate, closing the days of being dismissed and opening a new chapter of self-respect. When Earl finished the last lock, he asked, "Feel better now?" I answered, light but steady, "Yes. Thank you, Earl. Tonight, I'll finally sleep well." He nodded and shook my hand, his eyes saying more than words. Night fell. The house was quiet. Only the tick of the clock and the wind through the trees. I sat by the window, looking out at the yard where the rose pots still sat in the dark corner. Tomorrow, I'd bring them back to their spot so they could catch the sun and bloom like before. I held my teacup. The steam warmed my hands. In that stillness, I heard the crisp clicks of the new locks, each one like a declaration. No one would cross this threshold without my permission again. No one would call this her house. I sat there, closed my eyes, and breathed in the chamomile. For the first time in years, I felt truly calm. Not because I'd won, but because I stood up for what was mine. On the wall, Calvin's photo was still there. I looked at him and smiled softly. "I did it, love. I'm not afraid anymore." Moonlight spilled onto the porch, glinting silver on the new locks. The house was still, but I could feel it breathing again, as if it too was relieved to be back in the hands of its rightful owner. I whispered, just for me to hear, "From now on, Loretta Wynne will not be thrown out of her own home." And that night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. The sleep of a woman who just reclaimed her dignity and the keys to her life. That night, Richmond's sky felt heavy, thick with rain and electricity. I sat by the window, the curtains stirring, my cup of tea gone cold. The clock in the living room struck 1 a.m., right as I heard a car stop at the gate. 2 headlights swept across the brick wall, then went dark. A car door slammed, footsteps rushed, and Darren's voice rose in the yard, hoarse, sleepy, edged with anger. Rebecca, Mom probably just forgot the outside lock. Hold on. I didn't move. I knew perfectly well this time I hadn't forgotten anything. A key slid into the lock, twisted, then stopped. A short silence, then Darren knocked. Mom, open up. The lock stuck. No answer. Seconds later, Rebecca knocked harder, her voice rising. Mrs. Loretta, can you hear us? Open the door. I stayed in the dark, peeking through the curtain. Under the streetlight, their faces were starting to show confusion. Darren tried the key again. The metal clacked like desperation knocking on the house itself. Maybe she changed the locks, Rebecca said, voice trembling but still trying to sound proud. Darren frowned. No way. Who would do that? Maybe to get back at us. She said it quietly, but I heard every word. I took a sip of cold tea. The chamomile was bitter on my tongue. They still didn't understand this wasn't retaliation, it was the end of my patience. 10 minutes later, the knocking turned into pounding. Mom, open the door now! Darren's voice screamed, laced with panic. Are you crazy, Mom? We live here! I stayed silent. I wanted them to feel the chill of distance, the loneliness of people who once looked down on others. Rebecca started yelling, You think this is right? You're just making everyone see how pathetic you are. Then she burst into tears. Sobs, footsteps scraping the tile, the sprinkle of rain mixed in. I still didn't move. In the dark, I heard my heart beating slow and steady. Each beat was the rhythm of a quiet reckoning, not with words, not with tears, but with intentional silence. We'll sleep in the car, Rebecca shouted after the pounding went nowhere. Darren said nothing. I knew he was thinking. He understood he had no rights here anymore. A moment later, I heard the engine start. Headlights flashed, cutting across the fence where the roses had been left in the dark corner. Then the car rolled away and disappeared into the night. The house fell still again. No more pounding. No more bitter words. Just me and the peace I'd bought with courage. I stood up and walked the house, touching each new lock, each closed door. No other hands could open them now, except mine. For the first time in years, I felt safe in my own home. I stepped onto the porch and took a long breath. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of earth and a faint drift of roses. I smiled softly. On the wooden swing Calvin built, I sat and looked at the fogged-up sky, took another sip of tea. Tonight, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of the kind of endurance that makes people think you're weak. The next morning, I woke later than usual. The first light spilled through the window, so gentle it made everything look like a dream. I ate breakfast alone, toast and eggs, and brewed a cup of coffee. The coffee machine Rebecca had placed in the sun, I'd put away in the shed, along with the things she called trendy. As I was washing dishes, the phone rang. Darren's name lit up the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. His voice was tight, exhausted. Mom, I'm sorry about last night. I just want to come in and grab our things. Rebecca needs clothes, papers. Can you open the door for a minute? I dried my hands and answered evenly, No, Darren. When there's an apology, I'll open the door. He went quiet for a few seconds. Then his voice turned cold. Don't make me call the police. I chuckled lightly, not angry, just pitying. The police? Go ahead if you want. But they'll ask whose name is on the deed. And you already know the answer. A long silence. I heard heavy breathing on the other end. Then a click, he hung up. I set the phone down, calm. I knew the real battle had just begun. All morning, I sat on the porch. Sunlight glinted on the new locks, bright like silver. I listened to birds chatter, the wind tapping the fence, and realized those sounds were more familiar than any words. The house no longer echoed with arguments, no longer smelled like costly perfume drowning out old tea, no longer heard Rebecca's heels clacking down the hall like she owned the place. Now, there was only the wind and my own whisper. I closed my eyes and replayed Darren's line from last night. Her house. How ironic. I'd let them believe that for far too long. At noon, a car stopped at the gate. I didn't need to look to know they were back. Darren pressed the bell, his voice tense. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I really need to get our stuff." I opened the window, not the gate, and said clearly, "Darren, your things will be packed in bags on the porch tomorrow. You can pick them up without coming." Rebecca cut in, her voice sharp. "You have no right to keep our things." I looked at her through the window, steady. "You're mistaken. I'm not keeping anything. I'm protecting what's mine." Darren tugged her arm and murmured, "Let's go, Rebecca." "Mom's not going to change," she snapped. "Just wait and see." They left, tires screeching against the road like anger that hadn't burned out. That afternoon, I carried the watering can to the garden and put the roses back. I set each pot in its old spot, where the sun fell kindly. The soil at the roots was hard and dry, but as I poured water, it softened, drinking it in, as if the flowers were exhaling. I bent and stroked a petal. "We're home," I whispered. "From now on, no one moves you again." A light breeze passed, and the roses trembled. I lifted my eyes to a sky clearer after the night's rain. At sunset, I sat again on Calvin's swing. The sun slipped behind the trees, leaving a wash of pink-orange across the yard. I closed my eyes and heard the new lock click as the door shut behind me. For the first time in years, I truly felt at home, not because of the walls or the roof, but because I'd reclaimed the right to be here without asking anyone's permission. I breathed in deep and let it out slow. Inside me, there was no anger left, only clarity. This fight didn't need shouting. It only needed silence strong enough to be heard. And that night, I brewed another cup of tea, sat by the window, watched the moonlight fall on the eaves, and smiled. Because for the first time in months, I could say to myself, "Loretta Wynne, you are home." 3 days after Darren and Rebecca left, I still hadn't heard from them. The house was strangely quiet, no footsteps, no pointless fights. I made tea, turned on the radio, and felt as light as if I'd just dusted after a storm. I thought they'd call soon. But they stayed silent. And I wasn't in a hurry. Until a Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a woman in a leather jacket and sunglasses, confident to the point of defiant. She looked around like she was appraising the place. When I opened the door, she gave a stiff smile. "Are you Loretta Wynne?" "I'm Alyssa Moore, Rebecca's sister." I nodded and motioned her in, already guessing why she'd come. Alyssa spoke before I could pour tea. "Rebecca asked me to talk. She says you're making things difficult." I arched a brow. "Difficult?" "Yes. She says you changed the locks, won't let them get their things, and said things that hurt Darren. I think at your age you should be a little more accommodating." Her voice was smooth, but every word dripped condescension. I answered calmly, "I just want peace in my own home. If that makes them uncomfortable, maybe they should review how they've been treating me." Alyssa sneered. "Or maybe you're jealous? My sister is young, educated, and knows how to live modern. I hear you keep the house old-fashioned floral curtains, wedding photos from the last century, things no one displays anymore. Maybe Rebecca was only trying to help." I went quiet for a few seconds. A year ago, those words might have choked me. Now they just seemed ridiculous. I poured tea, slid a cup toward her, and said slowly, "I'm not jealous of anyone, Miss Alyssa. But I'd rather live alone and be respected than share a home with people who only know how to look down on others." Alyssa paused, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "No wonder my sister says you're hard to live with. You really are one of those older generation types who always think they're right. Maybe that's why your husband put up with it his whole life and still didn't get far." I lifted my head. My eyes went cold. "You don't know anything about my husband, so don't speak his name, and if you came here to insult me, the door's open. You can leave." The air tightened. Alyssa set her untouched cup down, anger flashing in her eyes. You know, she said, voice sharp as a blade, my sister's been through this before. Her ex-husband's family kicked her out too, because they couldn't stand her being straightforward. And I think you're doing the same thing, pushing another woman out of a home. I tilted my head. You're saying Rebecca was kicked out by her ex's family? Alyssa was silent for a beat, realizing she'd slipped. It doesn't matter. That's in the past. I gave a thin smile. It matters. Because now I see the problem isn't me. Your sister never learned to respect anyone. Alyssa shot to her feet and grabbed her purse. Talking to you is pointless. No wonder Rebecca says you're controlling and stubborn. I answered lightly. Maybe, but at least I know how to hold a boundary. Something your sister never learned. She turned and marched out, heels striking the pavement like she was stamping out her anger. I watched her go. Not angry, only seeing the truth more clearly. When the gate clicked shut, I sat down, took a sip of cold tea, and whispered, "Thank you, Alyssa. You just told me what I most needed to know." 2 weeks later, the phone rang at midday. Unknown number. I wasn't going to answer, but a feeling made me pick up. Darren's voice came through, hoarse and tired. "Mom, it's me." I stayed silent. "Mom, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help. I'm out of money. My phone's been cut off. Rebecca's crying, and we're at a cheap motel near the bus station. I just need a little money for the apartment deposit, and I'll pay you back." I closed my eyes, listening to the ceiling fan spin slowly. What I felt wasn't anger, it was heaviness. My son, who once had a steady job and lived in the home his parents built, was now begging because he'd thrown it all away. I asked quietly, "And your job?" They suspended me. Rebecca said she'd help me find something else, but nothing yet. "And your savings?" "Gone, Rebecca. Bought some essentials." I sat up straight. "Essentials like a $300 coffee machine?" I asked, even and cool. Darren went silent, only a long, shaky sigh. "Mom," his voice broke, "I know I was wrong. I'm just asking you to help once." I gripped the receiver, feeling both love and pain, but if I softened now, everything would go back to the way it was. I spoke slowly, each word clear. "Darren, if you had shown respect, you wouldn't have been thrown out of the place you once belonged to." The line went completely quiet. I heard something like a swallowed sob. Then his voice, small and thin, "Mom, I just want to come home," I answered. "This is still your home if you're humble enough to knock, not pound." I hung up. My hands shook a little, but inside I was strangely calm. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I wasn't being controlled by the fear of losing my son. I knew that sometimes, the only way for a child to learn the biggest lesson is for a mother to let him endure. That night, heavy rain fell. I sat by the window and watched water trace long lines down the glass. I remembered the years when Darren was little. Whenever thunder crashed, he would run to me and hide behind my back. Now he's probably sitting somewhere in a shabby room, listening to the rain like I am, but with a different feeling, the feeling of someone facing the consequences of his own choices. I don't feel happy about it. I only feel compassion, the kind a mother has when she's clear-headed enough not to rescue her child from a necessary lesson. The next morning I got a text. "Mom, I'm sorry. I won't bother you anymore. When I get a job, I'll come apologize to you in person." I read it and didn't reply. I set the phone down and stepped into the garden. The roses were coming back, tiny buds pushed up after days left in. The dark. I bent down and brushed a petal still wet with dew. Sometimes, to bring something back to life, you have to let it die first, I told myself. That afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stopped by with some baked goods. She heard the story and just shook her head. Sometimes people only understand the value of a home when they're forced to stand outside the door. I smiled and answered, "Exactly. And once they understand, the door can still open, only they need to know how to knock." Mrs. Jenkins held my hand and said softly, "You're strong, Loretta." If it were me, I might have caved. I looked at the roses soaking up the sun and said, "Steady and light." I used to cave too. But I realized kindness doesn't mean letting people trample your dignity. That night, I sat alone on the swing. The breeze carried the scent of newly opened roses. Moonlight shattered into pieces across the porch. I closed my eyes and pictured Calvin sitting beside me, quiet as always, his hand over mine. "Do you see?" I whispered. Our son is finally learning what we always taught respect, and in that moment, my heart felt lighter, not anger, not hurt. Only a deep stillness, as if the storm had passed, and what fell were the things that should have fallen long ago. About 2 weeks after I refused to lend Darren money, I figured I wouldn't hear from him again. But that night, close to midnight, the phone rang. A strange number showed on the screen, not my son's old one. A feeling made me pick up, even as my chest tightened. "Mom!" Darren's voice came through, rough, dragging each word. I heard music and loud chatter in the background, glasses clinking. He was in a bar. "Have you been drinking?" I asked. "Just a few," he said, but his voice trembled and broke. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore." I sat at the table, gripping the phone. "Tell me, Darren, what happened?" He was quiet for a few seconds, then it burst out of him. Rebecca said, "If I really love her, I have to cut you off." I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised, but because I'd sensed this pain for a long time. The house, the silence, the petty fights, it all led to this moment. Still, hearing my own son say it felt like someone squeezing my heart, I said nothing for a while. On the line, there was only Darren's heavy breathing and pounding rock music. "Do you love her that much?" I asked gently, voice flat as a calm lake. I don't know anymore. Everything's a mess." "She says you hate her, that you never accepted her." I looked at an old frame on the shelf, a photo of Darren at 6, grinning next to his father in the backyard. I spoke slowly, one word at a time. "Darren, you grew up in this house. Have you ever seen me insult anyone under this roof?" Silence. So long I thought the line had dropped. Then I heard him sniff, choked up. "Never, Mom." "Then think about this. Someone who's never insulted anyone, why would she suddenly treat your wife badly? Or did someone make you see your mother differently?" I heard him gasp, then cry. He really cried the cry of a 32-year-old man who suddenly sounded like the 15-year-old boy he was when his father died. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I don't know how I let it get this far." I gripped the phone tighter. Tears rose, but I swallowed them. "No, Darren," I said, calm as ever. "What's saddest isn't that you were wrong, it's that you haven't grown up. A real man doesn't need orders about whom to love or hate. You let your wife dictate how you treat your own mother, so are you a husband or a child being led around?" He was quiet with only muffled sobs. "Mom, I hurt you, I know, but Rebecca says she's exhausted, that you're always against her. She's exhausted because she can't control people the way she wants, Darren, and I'm exhausted from watching you abandon respect." My voice stayed even, though my hands shook not from anger, but from a heart fighting to stay firm. I took a deep breath and went on. "Listen to me. Tomorrow, get up early. Go to work and talk to your boss. Even if you have to start from scratch, you do it. You need to stand up, not drink and complain. And if you want to talk to me, come alone." "No, Rebecca, no apologies on her behalf. No," she said, "just you and me." Darren was silent for a long time. I heard a heavy sigh reel this time, like the alcohol was wearing off. "Do you think Rebecca doesn't love me anymore?" "I don't know," I said. "But I know this. Anyone who makes you cut off your family doesn't know how to love." I heard him choke up, then speak through the rain outside the bar. "Mom, I'm sorry. I just want you to know, I'm not happy. Even with Rebecca, I feel empty. I miss home." I closed my eyes. "Home is still here, Darren. But you'll have to walk through the door with respect, not shallow apologies." He didn't answer, just kept repeating, I'm sorry, until the cell signal blended with the rain and went dead. After I hung up, I sat frozen for a long time. The room was dark except for the streetlight painting yellow streaks across the old wall. I reached for the leather journal Calvin gave me before he died, the one where I keep what I want to save for myself. I opened to a new page, pen in hand but not writing yet. I looked at an old line. "The day Calvin died, my hands shook." I smiled sadly, then wrote a new line. "Tonight, my hands don't shake anymore." I set the pen down and closed the journal. Outside, the wind tapped the window frame. Inside me, there was no fear of being disliked, no gnawing over what was lost. I realized a mother's love isn't always an embrace. Sometimes it's letting go so a child can fall and stand up on his own. The next morning, the sky was clear. Early sunlight poured through the window, washing the old wooden table where coffee rings still stained the surface. I stepped into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and took out another cup. But this time, I wasn't preparing for anyone else, just me. I made tea, added a slice of lemon, and let the scent drift through the kitchen. I sat down, watched the steam rise, and realized it was the first time in years I'd had tea without waiting for someone to come home. I thought of Calvin. If he were alive, he'd smile and say I'd finally learned how to love myself. I smiled back at the framed photo on the shelf and said softly, "See, Calvin, I did it. My hands don't shake anymore." Then I took the first sip and let the warmth spread through me. Outside, the roses had burst open after the night's rain, each petal beaded with dew, trembling in the light, but still proud, still strong. I saw myself in them. I don't know when Darren will call again, or whether he'll come back. But I know this. If he does, he'll cross the threshold with the respect I've waited my whole life to receive. As for me, this morning I brewed one more cup just for myself, and it tasted sweeter than ever. 3 days passed since Darren called drunk. I wasn't waiting for another call anymore. Inside me, everything felt closed, not by hatred, but by a strange quiet. That morning, while I was making tea, the phone rang again. A strange number, but I knew who it was the moment I saw it. I answered and held the phone to my ear. "Mrs. Wynne, it's me, Rebecca." Her voice was hoarse and tired, none of the sharpness or swagger of the woman who once gave orders in my kitchen. I said nothing and waited. "Could you listen for a few minutes? I just want to apologize so we can end all this." I sat down and set the hot cup in front of me. She'd clearly been crying, but I didn't let feelings steer me. "You want to apologize?" I asked slowly. "Then, start by listing exactly what you did wrong. Specifically, no vague talk." I heard shaky breathing on the line. Then Rebecca spoke, halting, each sentence heavy as it pushed through her throat. "I moved your things without asking. I changed the curtains, put away your husband's photo. I talked back and told you to leave your own house." I stayed quiet until she finished. Her voice was raw and tired, but I didn't hear true remorse, just the erosion of desperation. "You listed it right," I said, "but I still haven't heard one thing. Why did you do all of it?" A long silence. Then a sigh, and her voice snagged. "Because I couldn't stand Darren always talking about you. Every time we fought, he used you as an example. He said you were strong, kind, steady. I hated hearing it. I was jealous because he loves you more than me." That made me pause, not out of pity, out of surprise. I didn't expect her to be that honest, but her jealousy wasn't love. It was selfishness eating everything away. "Rebecca," I said more softly, "do you really love Darren?" A stifled sob, then held back crying on the line. "I think I do, but now I'm not sure. Maybe I only love the feeling of being needed. And when he turned toward you, I felt like I disappeared. I leaned back and looked out at the yard. The roses I'd trimmed yesterday still glistened, fresh as if they'd never wilted. I understood Rebecca's fear of being replaced, of not being enough, so she chose to ruin things to hold on to a warped kind of love. "Rebecca," I said slowly, "you didn't lose to me because of my age or because Darren loves his mother. You lost because you haven't learned to love anyone without pushing someone else down." She sobbed but didn't argue. I could hear her sniffing, breath shaking. After a few seconds I went on, "I'll meet you. But just you, not Darren." "Meet me?" she said, startled, voice wavering. "Yes. If you're sincere about apologizing, come here. A phone call isn't enough. You'll look me in the eye and say everything, not for me to forgive you, but for you to understand what you need to change if you want your life to start over." Rebecca was quiet for a long time. I heard her take a deep breath, then whisper, "When do you want me to come?" "This afternoon, 5 p.m., when the sun starts to fade. And come alone." "Okay." Her voice shrank. "Thank you." I didn't answer. I hung up. That afternoon, I set the living room table, brewed a pot of Earl Grey, and placed a chair across from mine. The house was quiet except for the clock ticking on the wall. I opened the window to let the breeze in, clearing the damp left by last night's rain. 15 minutes before the hour, I looked around the house, every brick, every frame, every small thing, each tied to my life with Calvin. Each one was the result of years of sweat and tears, of real love and stubborn resolve. I realized I'd never truly lost my place as the owner. I'd just let fear of losing my son take up that space in my heart. I took a long breath. This meeting would decide everything, not only between me and Rebecca, but also Darren's future. When the clock struck 5 p.m., there was a soft knock. I opened the door and saw Rebecca standing there. She wore a simple dark dress, her face pale, no makeup. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She gripped a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums. "Hello," she said quietly. I avoided her eyes and simply said, "Come in." Rebecca sat down, both hands on her knees, trembling slightly. I poured tea and slid the cup toward her. "You said you wanted to apologize," I began. "So today, say it clearly. No beating around the bush." Rebecca swallowed hard, staring at the cup in front of her. "I was wrong. About everything. I changed things in this house without asking. I treated you badly. And I treated myself badly. I made Darren turn against his own mother. I know that was wrong, but back then I just wanted to prove I mattered more than you." She paused, took a deep breath, then continued in a small but steady voice. "You may not believe it, but I truly regret it. I don't even recognize who I am anymore. Darren barely talks to me now. He just goes quiet, avoids my eyes. I think I've ruined everything." I looked at her for a long moment. Maybe for the first time, I didn't see the cold, haughty woman who once walked into my house with a judging stare. In front of me was a lost young person facing the consequences of her own choices. "Rebecca," I said, my voice lowering, "I won't judge you by your tears. I just want to ask one thing. If tomorrow Darren comes back here and asks me to let you live with us, what will you do to prove you've changed?" Rebecca looked up, eyes wet but steadier. "I won't say a word. I'll act. I'll put everything back the way I messed it up. I'll return Mr. Calvin's photo to its place. I'll take care of you if you'll allow me. And if someday you feel I'm not worthy, I'll leave no arguing, no blaming." I nodded slightly. "I don't need you to serve me. I need you to understand that this house exists on respect, not power. If you step in here again, you'll live by that principle, or you won't live here at all." Rebecca bowed her head, her voice hoarse. "I understand." We sat quietly for a long time. A breeze carried the scent of roses in from the porch, light and soothing. I looked at her, thin. shaking hands on her knees, and suddenly remembered myself at 22 hands, shaking the same way the first time I stepped into a new house, afraid I wasn't enough, afraid of being left behind. I spoke softly. You don't need my forgiveness. Learn to forgive yourself first. As for me, I'll wait to see what you do, not what you say. Rebecca nodded, tears falling onto the back of Lotting in them. Her hand. Thank you for still giving me a chance. I didn't answer. When she stood, I said only one thing. This is the last chance. And it's your chance to prove something to yourself, not to me. The door closed behind Rebecca, leaving the scent of Earl Grey mingled with the chrysanthemums she brought. I looked out to the garden and saw the late sun fade, leaving a pale gray sky, not dark but not yet bright. I knew the real confrontation wasn't over, but at least for the first time, Rebecca didn't lie, and that small as it was enough for me to feel the tide had begun to turn. That morning, the breeze was light and the sky so clear it felt like spring was trying to arrive early. I got up early, opened the window, and let sunlight pour into a house that had been too long without human warmth. Today, I knew there would be an important meeting, not to end things, but to start over, if that was truly possible. Close to 10 o'clock, there was a knock. I stepped out, and there was Rebecca. No heavy makeup, no red lipstick, no expensive perfume. Her hair was tied back, her face was pale but strangely calm. In her hands was a bouquet of red roses, bright and fresh, like they were trying to hold on to one last bit of faith. "Mrs. Wynne," she said softly, her voice shaking. I stayed quiet, watching her. She hesitated for a few seconds, then suddenly knelt right there at the threshold, holding the bouquet up in both hands. "I came to apologize, not to be forgiven, but to show I understand. I know I hurt you, and Darren too." The wind moved across the porch, stirring the petals. I could see her shoulders trembling, tears running down, but she didn't drop her head to hide anymore. I stepped forward, put my hand on her shoulder, and said gently, "Stand up, Rebecca. Begging doesn't earn anyone respect, only change does." She stood, eyes red but clearer than before. I took the bouquet from her and set it on the living room table. "Thank you," I said. "But remember, there's only one chance." Rebecca nodded and whispered, "I know. I won't repeat my mistakes." That afternoon, as the light dwindled, I heard a car stop at the gate. Through the window, I saw Darren step out, so worn down I needed a second to recognize him. Patchy stubble, a wrinkled shirt, a slow, heavy gait. Beside him was Rebecca, walking behind him, leaving a little space, no longer clutching her husband's arm like a challenge. I opened the door. Darren lowered his head, voice rough. "Mom, I came to apologize, and to hear whatever you want to say." I motioned for them to come in. The air in the living room felt dense. This was the same room where I'd been insulted, pushed out of my own place. Today it was the same room, but I sat in the center chair, facing them. On the table, I placed a blank sheet of paper and a pen. "Before either of you say anything," I began, "I want to set 5 rules. Not to control you, but to make sure that if we live under one roof, no one gets hurt again." Both were silent. I took a steady breath and laid out each rule, slow and firm. First, respect the homeowner. I don't need you to agree with everything I say, but in this house, words must be spoken with respect. No one gets to use a snide tone or bark orders, not even me. Second, don't change anything in the house without asking first. From a photo on the wall to a rose in the garden, everything carries memories. If you want to rearrange, we discuss it. Don't treat this place like a playground for your ego. Third, no yelling, no insults, not even once. If there's a problem, we talk. If we can't talk, we stay quiet until we calm down. One shout can shut a heart for good. Fourth, don't use Darren as a shield. I've seen how Rebecca uses my son as cover for every mistake. From now on, whoever does it owns it. Real love doesn't need a third person standing in the middle. Fifth, everyone contributes to this home with hands, not words. No one is here just to be served. We cook together, clean together, tend the garden together. If someone thinks that's beneath them, they don't deserve to live here. I looked up at the two of them. The room was still with only the clock ticking. Darren spoke first. "Mom, I agree. I'm sorry for everything. I was blind. I let someone make me forget who you are, but now I remember. I won't make excuses." His voice was low, tired, but genuine. My eyes stung, but I kept steady. Rebecca bowed her head and spoke slowly. "I agree too. I apologized to you the other day, but today I want to say it again in front of my husband. I know I broke trust, but I want to rebuild it, no matter how long it takes." I looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine, but remember, words are just the start. I need actions." That evening, for the first time in months, my kitchen lights glowed. Darren rolled up his sleeves and washed vegetables. Rebecca boiled potatoes while I made Calvin's favorite chicken stew. Steam rose, and a warm smell filled the kitchen, blending with the tap of knives, the simmering pot, and a few soft laughs. No one talked much, but the air wasn't tense. When Darren spilled a little water, Rebecca didn't snap, she smiled. Watching that, I felt my heart soften like thick ice slowly melting under the first weak sunlight of spring. When the dishes were on the table, I sat down and looked at them both. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," I said, "but tonight we're eating together like a family. No past, no mistakes, just this meal." Darren lifted his glass of water and looked at me. "Thank you for not locking the door forever, Mom," Rebecca added softly. "And thank you for believing I can be different." I smiled. "It's not that I believe, it's that I'm giving you the chance to prove it. Trust has to be replanted little by little." We ate together. The stew tasted the same sweet broth, a touch of pepper, but tonight it had something extra, the flavor of forgiveness, of a family learning to breathe again after a storm. Outside, the streetlights came on. Warm yellow spilled through the window and lit the faces of 3 people around a table, not perfect, but real. I looked at them, then around the house that once rang with arguments, and felt something small but precious: peace. After we cleared the table, Darren asked, "Mom, can I help you work on the rose garden tomorrow?" I nodded with a smile. "Sure, but wear gloves. Those pots have thorns." Rebecca stood nearby and said quietly, "If it's okay, I'd like to help too. I want to learn to care for them the way you do." I turned to her, no longer with bitterness in my eyes. "Okay. But remember, flowers only bloom when they're tended with a true heart." She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. Darren took her hand, gratitude in his eyes. I looked out at the porch, soft yellow light spreading over the old brick. This house had weathered so many months of tears and sharp words, but now there was only that gentle glow. I whispered, as if speaking to Calvin, "Look, the house is bright again. Not perfect, but it's still home." And in that moment, I knew. The storm had truly passed. Time moved faster than I expected. 6 months after that first dinner we shared post-storm, the house had its old rhythm back, different, deeper, steadier, and more peaceful. I remember clearly the first morning after our new pact. Rebecca woke early and came into the kitchen while I was about to make tea. She tapped lightly on the doorframe and asked in a small, sincere voice, "Mom, I want to change the curtains in the dining room. I'm asking first, would you be okay with that?" Such a simple question, but to me it felt like the first bell of real change. I looked at her and nodded. "Yes, but keep the old curtains. They're part of my and Calvin's memories." She smiled, didn't argue, just said softly, "I understand." From then on, Rebecca kept her word bit by bit. No more orders, no more touching things without asking. In the mornings, she swept the porch and wiped the table. In the afternoons, she helped me cook, washed dishes, and tidied the kitchen. At first, she moved awkwardly, but I didn't criticize. I let her learn, and she truly tried. Once, when I reminded her she'd put the dishes in the wrong place, Rebecca just smiled without arguing. I'm still learning. Keep telling me. I won't take it the wrong way. I looked at her and heard no trace of the old sharpness of someone who wanted to win with words. Maybe she had learned that respect doesn't make you smaller, it lets you stand steadier. Darren changed too. He didn't avoid things anymore. In the mornings before work, he'd stop by the kitchen and ask if I needed help. I'd just smile and hand him a lunchbox. Just do your job well. I saw something in his eyes. I thought I'd lost. Calm and confidence. He wasn't a man stuck between two women anymore. He was someone who could keep the peace without losing himself. One evening, sitting in the living room, Darren said quietly, "Mom, I got a promotion. They said I'm steadier and more responsible now." I smiled, hiding how proud I was. "That's good, Darren. Maybe you've learned the most important thing. Take responsibility for yourself before you try to take responsibility for others." Rebecca sat beside him, her eyes soft on her husband. "You deserve it," she said. I looked at them and felt light. Maybe I was right not to keep the door locked forever. The house returned to itself, but not itself in the old sense. It wasn't a place of shouting or stomping footsteps anymore. It was the small sounds of life. Running water, a knife on a cutting board, a quiet laugh at the morning radio. Mrs. Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, dropped by one late afternoon, looked around and said, "Mrs. Loretta, your house is lively again." The other day I walked by and heard laughter all the way to the porch. I smiled. Maybe the wind carried it. "No," she said, "that laugh is unmistakable. This house really has come back to life. Our former housekeeper, Mrs. Nancy, said something I won't forget. Before, every time I wiped down the kitchen, all I heard was sighs. Now it's different. I hear dishes clinking, folks talking, and laughter." "The house has laughter again, Mrs. Loretta." I just nodded without saying anything, but inside me something like a long-buried spring rose up, not tears, but a renewed faith in restoration. One evening, when Darren got home late, Rebecca sat with me in the living room. No more awkward silences. She suddenly said, "You know, when I was little, my mother taught me one thing. Don't trust anyone. Anyone can betray you." I grew up in that fear. I didn't trust friends, didn't trust men, and I thought, if I didn't control people, they'd leave me. She paused, her voice tightening. "I know that made me into the kind of person you once hated, but now I understand. No one stays because of fear. Only love makes people stay." I stayed quiet, listening. In the warm light, Rebecca's face looked calm, with no trace of the prideful, cutting woman she used to be. I said softly, "Rebecca, everyone is afraid of being abandoned. But pushing others down so you can stand taller isn't strength. It's weakness wearing a proud mask. You have to learn to keep your self-respect without stepping on anyone else." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm learning, Mom, day by day." I smiled and set my hand on hers. "No one learns that in a day, but you're headed the right way." From that day, I noticed Rebecca truly changed. She often asked me about small things: how to make chicken soup taste sweet, how to prune roses without breaking the stems, how to brew tea just right. At first, I thought she just wanted to win me over, but gradually I realized she genuinely wanted to learn. One early morning while I was watering the plants, Rebecca came out holding a cup of tea and said quietly, "I made this. Not sure if it tastes right to you." I took a sip. "A bit strong, but not bad." I nodded. "Pretty good. A few too many leaves, but the aroma is right." She smiled, eyes lighting up like a child being praised. On spring evenings, before the heat settled in, we often sat on the porch. Darren talked about work, Rebecca chatted about the plants she was growing, and I listened with a smile. Once, Darren squeezed his wife's hand and said, "I never thought we'd be this peaceful again." I answered gently, "Peace isn't luck, Darren. It comes from each person learning to see others with the heart instead of the ego." Rebecca rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "And I think I learned that from you, Mom." I didn't reply. I just looked out at the garden. The roses were blooming evenly, their scent threading through the leaves, light as breath. Calvin used to say, "When a house has laughter and the smell of flowers, it means things are back where they belong." I smiled softly and murmured to myself, "Finally, everything is back in its place." Sometimes, standing in front of the mirror, I saw a woman with gray hair but bright eyes and a steady heart. I was no longer the weak mother pushed out of her own kitchen. I was the keeper of the fire in this home, and this time it burned with understanding, not victory. In the last 6 months, I relearned how to be a mother. Rebecca relearned how to be a daughter-in-law, Darren relearned how to be a husband and a son, and the 3 of us relearned how to be a family. Peace doesn't come from deciding who's right and who's wrong. It comes when people sit down and listen with their hearts. I stood by the window, watched the sunlight spill across the roses, and felt something rise in me that words couldn't capture. True peace had returned. That summer arrived gently. The sunlight wasn't harsh. It stretched across the porch like a warm blanket, soft and easy. I stood in the garden with pruning shears in hand, the scent of roses floating everywhere. The pots that once wilted in a dark corner now bloomed, bright and proud like me, after so many stormy months. Rebecca was hanging laundry in the backyard, hair tied back, face sun-kissed. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled. It wasn't stiff anymore. No hidden edges, just the honest smile of someone who knows she's where she belongs. I nodded back. Darren came out of the kitchen door with a glass of lemonade and set it in my hand. "Mom, it's hot, drink this. Rebecca and I just finished planning the porch repair. I'll call the contractor next week." I smiled. "Okay, but remember to ask before you change anything." He laughed, warm. "Of course, Mom." The 3 of us sat on the porch together. The breeze moved through the trees, cicadas droned, and sunlight flickered through the leaves, reflecting on faces a little worn but peaceful. I watched Darren wipe his wife's brow and Rebecca rest her hand on his shoulder, and it struck me what I'd been waiting for wasn't perfection, but this simple moment. That night, I wrote in my journal. The fresh page trembled a bit under my pen, but the lines were steady. "Today, the house truly came back to life," I wrote. No more arguments, no more contemptuous glances, just laughter, the clink of dishes, and the smell of food filling the kitchen. I set down the pen and looked around the room. Our wedding photo, mine and Calvin's, had been rehung by Rebecca in its old place, right in the center of the living room. The warm light fell on his face, and it felt like he was looking at me, smiling. I said softly, "Finally, I kept this home not just with keys, but with love." Time passed, and we fell into a habit of sitting together every evening. Sometimes it was late tea, sometimes just a few bits of small talk. I told Rebecca old stories about Calvin, how he worked construction, always came home late, but never forgot to bring me a peppermint candy. She listened closely, eyes damp, then said, "I wish I'd known him. Maybe I would have learned how to love sooner." I smiled. "It's never too late, Rebecca. What matters is you started." She squeezed my hand, the hand that had once been hard and cold like metal, now softer, warmer. In that touch, I saw a woman changing day by day. And I understood forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. Another evening, as dusk fell, Darren brought out 2 wooden chairs and set them on the porch. "Mom, come sit with me." "The sunset's beautiful." I sat beside him. The sun was sinking slow behind the distant hills, washing the sky in bright orange. From the kitchen came the sound of a pan sizzling as Rebecca cooked. It reminded me of years long gone when Calvin and I sat just like this, watching the evening fade without a word. "You know, Darren," I said softly, "I once thought I'd never feel this kind of peace again. But it turns out peace doesn't come from circumstances. It comes when people learn to stop hurting each other." Darren nodded, silent, eyes far away. "Mom," he said gently, "I know there will never be enough words to make up for what I did. But I promise, for the rest of my life, I'll live in a way that makes you proud." I set my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "You don't have to make me proud, Darren. Just live decently, that's enough." That night, as I got into bed, the breeze carried the scent of roses through the window. I thought about the months behind us, from shouting and tears to silence and forgiveness. It was like a piece of music with every low and high note now settling into a complete ending. I smiled and whispered to myself, I didn't lose. I just had to relearn how to love properly. The next morning, Rebecca brewed tea for me while Darren trimmed the roses. I sat on the porch and watched those two people, once the source of my pain, now symbols of renewal. I added one last line to my journal. This house was once taken, then won back, not by anger but by grace. And that's what made it stronger than ever. I closed the journal and shut my eyes, listening to the wind slip across the roof. I knew Calvin, somewhere, was smiling too. Morning light sparkled through the leaves onto the tea table, where the three of us, Saturday. Rebecca shared plans to open a small flower shop in town. Darren talked about his new role at work, and I simply listened, warmth spreading through my chest. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. We've learned how to be a family. Not perfect, not loud, just real. Like the tea's aroma, the sunlight, and the laughter threading through the house, I turn to the audience listening to this story, those who may have been hurt, betrayed, or lost faith. I want to say, sometimes, to keep your peace, you have to let an old part of yourself go. Forgive not because others deserve it, but because you deserve the relief. If you've been through something like I have, I hope you know any door can be opened again, as long as you dare to hold the key. And before I close this story, I want to thank all of you who listened. Thank you for giving your time to a woman like me, to this small journey of courage and love. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment and share. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next ones. I promise we'll meet again on golden afternoons where those once hurt find themselves in the gentle light of grace. Mom, the table's already full. You can head over there. McDonald's would suit you better. My daughter-in-law's voice slid out light as a well-honed blade. She smiled and pushed the menu back toward the server. I stood still in the middle of the Copper Finch, the swankiest restaurant in this city, where my eldest son was throwing a promotion party. The clink of silverware on plates went quiet. The restaurant's warm lights caught the wine glass in his hand, glittering like an insult. I laughed. A dry, deep sound, like pulling a pin. I walked past them straight to the host stand and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Call the manager for me. Tell him Iris Caldwell is here to claim the owner's table." When Elliot, the restaurant manager, hurried out and put his hand on my shoulder, the whole room turned. She had no idea every glass of wine here poured straight into my pocket, and tonight I'd pour the rest right over her head. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Iris Caldwell, 70 years old, living in the suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina. I've worked my whole life with cracked hands, from hotel room attendant at a roadside place to warehouse manager for a supermarket chain. I used to believe a mother's love could cover any wound, that if I sacrificed enough, the kids would understand. But life isn't a fairy tale. I lost my husband early, lost my youth to overnight shifts, and in the end, lost the respect of the very children I raised. People saw a skinny old woman in worn-out shoes, but they didn't know that under this wrinkled skin is a woman who survived on grit, brains, and a secret big enough to buy my dignity back. I still remember the moment my daughter-in-law Aubrey's eyes shifted from triumphant to frozen. She sat there, in a room shimmering with candlelight, her smile stuck halfway on red lips. Beside her, my eldest, Grant, cleared his throat. He looked around, trying to act like nothing was happening, but I could see the way. His jaw locked, his hand whitening around the wine glass. Next to them was Mason, my younger son, head down like he wanted to disappear, and his girlfriend, Tessa, darting her eyes around, unsure where to place herself in the storm about to break. I went straight to Elliot, a man in a black suit, eyes bright behind his glasses. He bowed slightly, his familiar, respectful smile in place. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "so good to see you. Your table is ready." The room fell silent. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, half surprised, half disbelieving. I tilted my head and smiled. "Good. I think I'll sit at the center table tonight. The light's better there." Elliot nodded immediately. "Yes, ma'am, owner." That word owner dropped into the air like a stone into a still pond. I heard the whispers ripple out. Grant stared at Elliot, then at me, like he'd just realized the mother he'd always thought was a poor old woman was someone entirely different. "Owner," Aubrey repeated, her voice trembling, eyes locked on me. I answered with a calm smile. "Oh, you probably didn't know. This restaurant belongs to Caldwell Holdings, and I'm the controlling shareholder." I paused, looked her straight in the eye. "So if I want a seat here, trust me, no one will dare say no." Elliot led me to the largest table in the room, white linen, candlelight glinting off crystal. I sat down slowly and set my leather purse on the table. When the server poured wine, I turned and smiled toward my son's table. "Please send a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2010 to the table over there," I said. "Consider it a gift to mark this memorable family evening." The server nodded, and I watched the color drain from Aubrey's cheeks. The whole restaurant went pin-drop silent, with only soft jazz floating through air tight enough to snap. Grant stood, pulled out his chair, and walked toward me. He tried to lower his voice, but I heard every word. "Mom," he said, "what are you doing? People are watching." I looked up, my calm so steady it threw him off balance. "It's all right, honey," I said. "They're just learning a small lesson. Never belittle the person who taught you to stand up straight." He clamped his mouth shut and glanced back at his wife. Aubrey bit her lip, forcing a smile, but I saw her hands shaking. Mason sat petrified, and Tessa only tilted her head, eyes full of sympathy, whether for me or for them, I couldn't tell. When the appetizers arrived, I glanced at Elliot and gave a small nod. He understood, signaling staff to set up 2 side tables near me. I opened my purse and took out my phone and a thick envelope. Inside were investment files, legal papers, ownership contracts, everything proving that this poor cleaning lady had quietly bought the Copperfinch 15 years ago. I hadn't planned to show it off, but tonight was different. Tonight I wanted them to see the woman they'd looked down on no longer needed their approval. I tapped my finger lightly on the table, cueing Elliot. He stepped to Grant's table and spoke loud enough to carry. "Mr. Grant, per Mrs. Caldwell's instruction, tonight's entire bill will be covered by the house. Congratulations on your promotion at this property owned by your family." A few soft laughs rose from nearby tables. I didn't turn around. I just lifted my glass, brushed it to my lips, and said quietly enough for Elliot to hear, "Nice opening." He bowed his head. "Would you like me to prepare the documents?" I nodded. Let them know tonight comes with a main course and the truth. I looked around the room, men in suits, women in silk dresses, light sliding through their wine glasses. all of it so familiar to me, because I'd chosen every detail with Elliot when we designed this place. The dark wood, the jazz, the lighting that flatters without flaunting. Only tonight I was in the right seat, and they weren't. I watched Aubrey try to look composed, taking a sip of wine, but her hand was shaking so badly, a few red drops flecked the tablecloth. Grant leaned in, whispered something, and they both stood, ready to leave. "I don't think we're done, son," I said, voice low but clear. "You invited me here, and now you plan to walk out of a dinner your own mother owns? That's rude." Grant stopped and turned back, his face flushed. I saw his eyes flicker between anger and shame. "You don't need to make a big scene, Mom," he murmured. "We can talk in private." "No," I said. "You chose to humiliate me in public, so I'm choosing the truth as our witness." No one said another word. Aubrey stared down, fists clenched around her purse straps. Mason looked from me to his brother, clearly wanting to speak but lacking the nerve. I looked at all three, the children I'd stayed up nights for, covering every meal, every tuition payment, every medical bill, and saw something painful but crystal clear. Unconditional love had turned them into ingrates. Elliot returned and handed me another envelope. Inside was Caldwell Holdings' quarterly report and the list of shares in other properties, hotels, cafes, even the buildings they were renting. I set the envelope on the table and laid my hand over it. "Elliot," I said, "I think it's time. Get the files ready. I want to announce ownership to the press, right here at this table." He bowed. "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell." I looked back at my sons, took one last sip of wine. "I didn't come here to eat dinner," I said calmly. "I came to reclaim the dignity you took from me." The room seemed to freeze. Aubrey looked up, eyes wet, but before she could speak, I set my glass down and smiled slightly. "Now," I said, "let's see who really doesn't belong here." That night, as I walked out of the Copper Finch, I knew one thing for certain. The role of gentle mother had closed. The curtain had fallen, and Act Two of my life justice had only just begun. I was born in a small town outside Charleston, where summers smell like salt and pine sap. My life, simply put, is a string of years carried by cracked hands and a stubborn belief that endurance is the only way to be loved. I married at 27 to Harold Caldwell, a quiet mechanic who loved me with a plain, sturdy kind of love. We didn't have much, but enough to believe happiness could be built if we worked hard. Then, one March morning, he went to fix a car for a friend and never came back. A highway accident. And within minutes I became a widow at 33 with 2 children. Grant was 8, Mason was 5. No insurance, no savings, just 2 kids, and a rental house tucked between old warehouses. I remember the first day I knocked on doors for work. People looked at me, a small woman with a face still swollen from crying, and said, "We just need a room cleaner, no degree required." I nodded. That was my first job, and the one that shaped my whole life. Housekeeping at a motel off the highway, where the rumble of semis ran through the sleepless nights of those with no other choices. I did that for 25 years. 25 years breathing bleach, bending over cold tile floors, washing sheets soaked with strangers' sweat. In winter, my hands cracked from chemicals. In summer, my back hurt so much I had to hold my breath just to bend and pick up a dime. But I didn't complain. Every morning I got up at 5 a.m., made instant coffee, set out cereal for the kids, and asked a neighbor to watch Mason. At night I came home, cooked the simplest dinner, listened to Grant's school stories, and put Mason to sleep with worn-out tales about the father they barely remembered. I thought I was strong until the day my mother had a stroke. The hospital demanded a deposit of $5,000, and I had only $600. I called everyone I knew, churches, odd jobs, friends, but no one had it. By the time I scraped the money together, she was gone. I remember sitting in the hospital hallway, the bill shaking in my hand, and swearing to myself, from now on, money will never decide my dignity again. After that, I started paying attention to numbers. At the motel, there was a long-term guest, Samuel Green, a retired accountant. He'd sit and read ledgers, mumbling tax notes like he was talking to himself. I picked up a few tricks. I asked questions. He laughed. "You want to learn? Sit down." So every night after I finished rooms, I sat with him and learned how to record expenses, calculate profit, and read a basic balance sheet. It was the first time I saw the world through numbers, not just sweat. I began keeping books for myself. Every tip, every spare dollar I made had a line in a small, cracked leather notebook. I logged how many rooms I cleaned, how much I spent on the kids, and always kept a little column called Future. At first, it was a few dollars a month, then a few dozen, then a few hundred. When it grew enough, I put it into municipal bonds, safe, low risk, slow but steady. I told no one, not even my children. One night, while I was wiping down the front desk, a man a bit younger than me walked in Elliott Park. He rented a space for a small, late-night coffee shop about to open. He asked, "Want to pick up an overnight cleaning shift? I need help." I said yes, not for the money, but out of curiosity. His cafe stayed open all night for truckers, students, and insomniacs like me. Elliot was kind, grateful, and sometimes let me try pulling espresso shots. When the shop started getting steady customers, I worked up the nerve to say, "If you want to open another location, I have a little savings." He smiled and asked how much. I said a number so small he thought I was joking. But he took it. 3 years later, the cafe turned a profit, and I became his first outside shareholder. That was my first turning point. Then came the recession. A string of small restaurants went under. People ran, dumping equipment, leases, licenses. I remember Elliot saying, "Smart folks get scared. The stubborn ones end up rich." I don't know if I was smart, but I was stubborn. I used my savings to scoop up what others feared: old kitchens, busted bars, bad leases in average locations. I fixed them, sublet them, or sold them when things improved. Piece by piece, with caution and patience, it became something bigger. Elliot said, "You should form a company." I shook my head. "I'm just a cleaning lady." He laughed. "Then let them think that." And so Caldwell Hospitality Holdings was born, a shell company with me as controlling shareholder and Elliot as the public operator. I kept working at the motel, still wore the faded blue uniform, still cleaned rooms and took tips like always, but in my ledger, the numbers told a different story. I still remember signing my first contract to acquire a small property. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the pen with both hands. Elliot said, "You know, someone can own a whole building and still clean it. The difference is now you get to decide who cleans with you." I laughed. No one at the motel knew the woman mopping floors owned 2 cafes and a profitable bakery, and through it all I thought only of Grant and Mason. I paid for private school on time. I bought Grant his first car when he got into college. I helped Mason with a security deposit when he landed his first job. I never begrudged $1, never asked for payback. I just wanted them to have what I never did. But the older they got, the farther they drifted. When Grant started dating Aubrey, a woman who spoke like she was judging the world, I saw something in his eyes. Shame. He didn't want me stopping by his apartment, didn't want friends to know his mother was a cleaning lady. Once, when I brought him homemade pastries, he glanced around and said softly, "Mom, next time you can just mail them." I smiled and nodded. The words were a small knife, not enough to kill, but deep enough to cut. Mason was gentler, but weak. He never opposed his brother, just silently agreed. I knew they loved me, but their love was mixed with embarrassment, like I was proof of a past they wanted to forget. I wasn't angry, I just watched, played dumb, stayed quiet, and remembered. When the Copper Finch opened a fine dining European place Elliot and I invested in, I still wore an apron and checked for dust in corners. Elliot asked, Do you want your name public? I shook my head. No. Let them think I'm staff. He was surprised, but I knew the day would come when that would save me. I kept that secret for 15 years. No one knew. No one needed to know. I lived simply, went to work, went home, and paid my grandkids' school fees. Sometimes, seeing Grant step out of a luxury car, shaking hands with clients, or Mason in a sharp suit, I smiled, half proud, half regretful. They had everything I dreamed for them, but had lost the one thing I couldn't buy back: respect for their mother. So when Aubrey said that night that McDonald's suited me better, I didn't get angry. I just felt the story had reached its ending. Because in the bag I carried that evening, along with my wallet and keys, were the ownership papers for the Copper Finch. And I knew it was time to use them to take back what they'd long forgotten: a mother's dignity. Grant married Aubrey in a blaze of autumn gold. The wedding was at a fancy golf club, every flower on the tables imported from Italy, the white dress costing nearly as much as the little apartment I rented when I was newly widowed. I remember standing in the last row, wearing a light blue dress pressed smooth, holding wild daisies. When I walked into the hall, one of Aubrey's friends asked if I worked there, because you look more like staff than a guest. I just smiled. Grant didn't hear it, and if he had, he'd probably just frown slightly and pretend it wasn't about him. Aubrey grew up in a middle-class family trying hard to look upper-class. Her father was a teacher, her mother an office worker, but they lived off reputation more than reality. From the first time she stepped into my home, she showed it, eyes scanning, comments that sounded like suggestions but were really criticism wrapped in silk. "Your house is a bit old but cozy," she said, fingers brushing the chipped paint on the doorframe. I answered, "Old is right, I spent the money on tuition for the kids." She smiled, but her eyes were cold as steel. Mason, my younger one, was the opposite of his brother kind, a little clumsy, and always avoiding conflict. His girlfriend, Tessa Brooks, a music teacher with a voice soft as spring wind, always bowed her head when greeting others. I liked Tessa. In her eyes I still saw something I no longer found in many young people: sincerity. But Tessa was afraid of Aubrey. Every time the family gathered, she sat perched on the edge of a chair, smiling stiffly like one wrong word would get her pushed off the table. I know how thin the line is between help and dependency. All my life I only wanted my kids to have it good. But the more I gave, the more they treated me like an endless supply, not a person. When I sent money to help Mason fix his car, he stopped saying, "Thank you." When I covered part of the condo down payment for Grant and Aubrey, they said, "You're so generous," as if I'd merely fulfilled an obligation, not offered love. Then one day, they said I should rest. The way they said it was gentle. The meaning was heavy as stone. "Mom, Aubrey and I have been thinking," Grant said one Sunday afternoon. "This house is too big for you. You're alone, no one to help. We just want you to be safer." Aubrey added, voice smooth as butter. "There's a new assisted living center, very nice. Shared kitchen, cleaning staff. You wouldn't have to work yourself anymore." I sat and stirred my tea. In my chest, the words they used pricked like tiny needles. Too big, alone, safer, shared kitchen, all just different ways to say the same thing. "You make us ashamed." I asked slowly, "What are you more afraid of, me falling down the stairs, or me walking into your party in an outfit that doesn't match the red carpet?" Aubrey gave a thin smile, glanced at Grant, then said, "Please don't take it the wrong way. We're only thinking about you." I nodded. "Right, I get it." I didn't argue. I just wanted to see what they'd do when I stopped giving. The next week, I lost my job. In truth, I quit on purpose, using layoffs as the excuse. I told no one. I wanted to run a simple test. When they think I have no income, how will they react? A week went by. No one asked if I was okay. On the 8th day, Grant texted, "Mom, I found a few great places. Close to us, very clean assisted living, friendly staff. I'll send you the links. You'll have friends your age, less lonely. I read it and smiled sadly. Right after came Aubrey's text. Mom, I know you love to cook, and they have a shared kitchen there. You can make your favorite dishes for everyone. That lifestyle really fits you. A minute later, Mason called. His voice was small, like he was afraid of what he was saying. Mom, I think he's right. You live alone, we worry. They have caregivers there, and we'd feel better. I wasn't angry at Mason. He's just weak. I was angry at the indifference baked into how they talked. Not one person asked, "Do you want to?" All I heard was, "We think." I didn't answer right away. That evening, I sat at the dining table staring at two empty chairs. One was Harold's. The other used to be Grant's when he was little. I remembered my 10-year-old, still calling me Mommy, holding my hand on the way to school. I remembered Mason, always scared of the dark, needing to sleep in my arms. Where did those children go? Who taught them that convenience matters more than family, and that the woman who gave them life can be arranged out of the way? My phone buzzed. A new message. Tessa. Miss Iris, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have stayed quiet when they said those things. I know they didn't mean well. I just didn't know what to do. I stared at the shaky words and, for a moment, I saw that young woman again, with the gentle smile and helpless eyes. I didn't blame Tessa. At least she still had a heart. I picked up my phone and hit record. When Grant called back to go over details about assisted living, I let the recorder run. When Aubrey sent more links, cheaper places that are still clean, I saved those too. I didn't know exactly how I'd use this evidence, but my gut said, keep it. The next day, Mason stopped by with a fruit basket. He tried to act cheerful, but his eyes kept sliding away. Mom, I know you're upset, but I thought about it, and he has a point. Living alone isn't good for your health. I looked at him for a long time, then asked one question. Have you ever thought about your own son saying that to you someday? He dropped his head. No answer. That night, I opened my laptop and replayed every recording. Grant's voice smooth and confident, like a boardroom. Aubrey's soft but cold. Mason's timid, afraid. I listened over and over until my tears dried. Then I closed the laptop and wrote one line on a small piece of paper. If you choose to sell your mother cheap, I will reprice you. I folded the note and tucked it into the notebook where I used to log every tip. Just like when I rebuilt my life after losing everything, I knew it was time to start another plan. But this time, not to make money, to take back my own worth. Outside the window, the streetlight washed the eaves with long stripes of pale glow. I sat still, hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, feeling something form quietly inside me, a hard, clean resolve, not of a weak mother, but of a woman who finally understands that kindness only holds value when people respect it. The air inside the copper finch that night was thick, like fog before a storm. The background music cut out, only spoons tapped softly against wine glasses and breaths came in shallow little waves. I sat at the big table in the center, under the crystal chandelier, where the light fell and made my skin look like it was wrapped in a calm, cold sheen. Elliot, the restaurant manager and my partner for 15 years, caught on instantly. He signaled for staff to bring out the set of rare wine glasses from the private cellar, the kind the restaurant only opens when the owner asks. The sommelier bowed and asked, Mrs. Caldwell, what would you like to have? I looked up, voice steady. Open the Chateau Lafite 2005. I think tonight deserves it. The room shivered. A few diners murmured. They knew that bottle was reserved for investors, people on an internal list one my son definitely had never seen. Elliot gave a small nod, and a few minutes later the cork popped like the first shot of a starting gun. I lifted my glass and looked over at the other table. Grant and Aubrey frozen like statues. Mason's head hung low. Tessa gently held his hand, eyes worried. I gave a thin smile and raised my glass toward them. "An appetizer from Caldwell Holdings," I said clearly, making sure those around us could hear. The server nodded, then placed a plate of salmon tartare at their table with a quiet explanation. "A gift from the restaurant's owner, Mrs. Iris Caldwell." Grant was stunned. I saw his gaze wobble, then he tried a strained smile like it was a joke. "Mom, are you a shareholder here?" he asked, voice rough. I set my glass down and answered, slowly, "No, son, I'm the owner." Their table went dead quiet. Aubrey looked up, her voice cracked, composure gone. "Where did you get the money?" I leaned forward so the light hit my face and spoke softly, but with steel. "From all those hours I spent mopping floors while you hid your face if you saw me on the street. From the tips I saved instead of buying new clothes, from sweat, from swallowing pride, and from the foolish belief that love would keep you from forgetting where you come from." Mason dropped his knife. Metal clanged hard in the stunned room. Tessa startled, then laid her hand over his, a small gesture filled with worry and a kind of pity I hadn't felt from anyone in our family for years. I turned to Elliot and whispered, "It's time." He nodded and walked toward the door, where 2 food journalists were waiting. Rumors about the anonymous owner of the Copper Finch had circulated in restaurant circles for years, but no one had ever seen her. Now, as Elliot led them in and camera flashes popped, every eye in the room fixed on me. "Mrs. Caldwell," the woman reporter stepped up, voice trembling with excitement. "Are you the founder of Caldwell Holdings?" I nodded. "I'm just a cleaning woman who believed good meals could rescue people from their weariness. Turns out, I could cook more than dinner. I could cook my own future." I took an envelope from my bag, opened it, and spread photocopies of ownership documents on the table, share purchase agreements, leases, tax registrations. Flashes kept firing. Elliot stood behind me, silent and solid like a wall. Grant tried to cut in, but his voice caught. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" I met his eyes. "Because I wanted to know if, one day, I had nothing left but these old hands, would you still think I deserved a seat at your table?" I paused, then said each word clean and clear. "Now I know the answer." Aubrey turned away, face flushed, mouth moving without sound. She dabbed at her lips with a napkin, her hand shaking so hard she knocked over her water. It spread across the table in a long streak like the track of something collapsing. I didn't stop there. I signaled to Elliot for more documents. He set a cream-colored folder tied with a red ribbon on the table. I turned to the reporters and smiled. "Here's the list of properties I own in this city: 4 cafes, 2 restaurants, and the office building that houses the bank where my son works. His branch leases space there. If this runs, readers might enjoy knowing that sometimes the person mopping the floor is the one who owns the ground you're standing on." Whispers rose across the room. A middle-aged man at a nearby table leaned to his wife. "It's a fairy tale flipped," I heard and smiled. "That's right," I said, loud enough for the room. "Except in this story, Cinderella doesn't marry the prince. She buys the castle." Soft laughter, a few claps from the corner. Elliot behind me gave a slight nod. He understood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming honor. Grant lowered his head, voice tight. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Grant," I replied. "Some apologies only count when they come with action, and I'm about to give you a chance to act." The evening slid on in awkward silence. The reporters left. The staff kept serving, but there was a new, quiet respect on their faces. When dessert came chocolate mousse I'd once helped develop. I looked at Grant and said slowly, "You know, dessert is always the most anticipated part of a meal. Because it's sweet, right?" But tonight, ours is different. I set my spoon down and tilted my head. Tonight's dessert is consequence. I didn't raise my voice, but each word fell like a bell, striking the silence of my whole life. Everyone reaches a limit, then it's time to stand up. I just chose to do it, under crystal lights. What about you? Have you ever had a moment like that? If you have, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to know they're not alone. No one spoke. Grant went rigid. Aubrey bit her lip. Mason sat frozen. Tessa bowed her head and squeezed her boyfriend's hand. I turned to Elliot. "Time to trigger phase 1, I said quietly, like an order. Elliot pulled out his phone and tapped out a few quick messages. I knew that simple motion sat on months of preparation, transfer papers, asset freezes on things I'd guaranteed for Grant, and covenant clauses on the Caldwell brand. Grant still didn't get it. He looked up, forced a laugh. "Mom, are you threatening us?" I answered softly. "No, I'm simply taking back what's mine. Like you clearing plates after washing dishes, I'm just clearing my life." A few guests left, but most stayed. Something in the air made them unwilling to miss it. They were watching a real play, where the nice mother costume came off and the woman they'd underestimated stepped onto the last stage of her life with her head high. Elliot returned and murmured, "It's done, Mrs. Caldwell. Everything's moved." I smiled and took the last sip of wine, oak blooming across my palate, the taste of victory, not loud, but deep and lasting. Before I left, I set the check on my son's table. Across the top, I wrote one line in black ink, "Love has no price, but respect does. From now on, I'll be setting everyone's value." I stood. The room was utterly quiet, only my heels ticking across the wood floor. As the door closed behind me, I heard Elliot tell the staff, "Make a note in the log. Tonight, the true owner of the Copperfinch appeared." Outside, a light wind moved down the street, carrying a hint of wine and charred wood. I took a long breath. The hurt in my chest was gone, replaced by a quiet pride. That night, I wasn't the mother pushed from the table. I was the woman who sat back down and flipped the whole table over. 3 days after the night at the Copperfinch, the city woke to a headline no one expected. "Son throws mother out of restaurant, turns out it's her restaurant." It was everywhere, from morning local news to social feeds I'd never cared about. A photo of me under the chandelier, wineglass in hand, calm eyes facing Grant and Aubrey, spread like wildfire. People talked, made memes, and named my story. The hidden owner, millionaire mom disrespected by her son, or simply Miss Iris and the lesson for the ungrateful. I said nothing. I let the public do what it does. What surprised me wasn't the reach, but the reaction. Thousands of comments. "I wish my mom were alive so I could say thank you. This should be shown in ethics class. No one has the right to turn their mother into a burden." And of course, some said I went too far. She must be bitter. Who knows the truth? Maybe she staged it for revenge. I didn't need them on my side. I just needed the truth to stand. 2 weeks later, a news alert popped up. NCS Capital suspends branch manager Grant Caldwell pending ethics investigation. I wasn't surprised. Banks hate scandal, especially anything resembling elder abuse. Photos of Grant in a suit, hand over his face as he left the building, flooded the media. People said he'd lost approval authority. His work accounts were locked. A finance blog even asked, if he doesn't respect the person who gave him life, how can he be trusted with other people's money? Aubrey fell in her own way. The elite women's club where she was a vice president canceled her membership for damaging the organization's image. Her friends, the ones who used to toast her taste and class, went silent. A few sent faux sympathetic messages, but most were just fishing for gossip. She pulled off social media, deleting an Instagram full of trips and wine parties. Mason, the son I still thought had a little light left, tried to deny it all. In a private text he wrote, "Mom, people got it wrong. I never wanted you out of your house." I just don't know how to say things right. I read it, then opened my laptop. The recordings, message logs, and emails I'd saved were all there. His voice telling his brother, "You're right. If Mom would move, we'd worry less." The evidence was clear. When I sent it back, I added one line, "Don't worry, I don't need an apology. I just need you to remember that next time, silence has a price." After the uproar, I started shutting off the valves. Every financial support I'd quietly provided, monthly allowances, my grandkids' tuition, apartment rent, I stopped. The automatic transfers to Grant's bank were canceled. The secondary card Aubrey used for event shopping was frozen. I didn't announce it. I let the declined card notifications do the talking. I asked Elliot to help audit company expenses. Many assets that had been temporarily in my son's name, the downtown condo, the Audi I bought, so they could get around easily, all belonged to Caldwell Holdings. Elliot asked, "Do you want them back?" I said, "No, I just want them to know they never owned any of it." But there was one I did take back, the penthouse on King Street. I'd bought it over a decade ago, in the company's name to avoid attention. I'd been renting it out while I lived in the old place in the suburbs. Now I moved in, living to my means, not hiding, not asking permission. The unit sits on the 20th floor, glass walls facing the Ashley River. That first night, I opened the balcony. Wind rushed in, smelling of salt. I made black tea, set it on the marble counter, turned on the soft gold lamp, and looked out at the city. In that quiet, I wasn't lonely. I was free. After 70 years, I was finally living not to be accepted, but to accept myself. When word got out I'd moved, a few major outlets asked for interviews. Some offered exclusive conversations, others pitched a documentary about the woman who built an empire in silence. I declined most. I chose one local station, the one that once ran a story on assisted living for low-income seniors, where I donated anonymously. I wanted to speak to ordinary viewers, not the sensational crowd. "We filmed in my kitchen, no script, no director," the interviewer asked. "Mrs. Caldwell, some say you're getting revenge." I smiled. "No, I'm not getting revenge. I'm carrying out justice." In families and in society, when people treat kindness as obligation, they forget what gratitude means. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So, what made you stop keeping quiet like before?" I looked straight into the lens. Silence is a language, but when it's used to step on you, it's time to speak with action. The segment aired on a Sunday night and got millions of views in 2 days. In it, I announced the Second Sunrise Fund, meant to help seniors facing emotional or financial abuse from their own families. We provide legal help, temporary housing, and emotional support for the abandoned. Elliot agreed to serve as executive director. I'm the founding patron. When they asked why that name, I said, "Because for many people, life doesn't have just one morning. There can be a second sunrise if they're brave enough to open their eyes again." After the broadcast, public opinion split. Some praised, some criticized. Some said I was inspiring, others claimed I was showing off, turning pain into a platform. At a small press Q&A at the fund, a young reporter asked, "Do you think you went too far, costing your own children their jobs and reputation?" I paused, then answered low and steady, "There's no such thing as too far when that same hand has been stepped on. I didn't destroy their lives. I removed the privilege of living wrong without consequences." I glanced around and saw a few nods. "Boundaries," I continued, "are the first lesson of love. If people don't learn that, love turns into a rope that tightens around your neck." In the days that followed, I stopped hearing their voices in my head. No more McDonald's would suit you better, no more averted eyes when I walked into a room. The city stayed loud, social media kept churning out fresh stories, but I knew that somewhere, a few seniors were receiving their first support checks from the fund. I pictured them opening a window, letting the sunlight in, and knowing they still had another morning to begin again. Sometimes, at day's end, I sit by the glass and watch the lights shimmer on the water and think, life is like that restaurant. Anyone can pick a seat, but only people who understand the value of work and self-respect have the right to order for themselves. And I, Iris Caldwell, finally ordered the right dish: justice, not pity. A month after the headlines cooled, I sent invitations to all three of them: Grant, Aubrey, and Mason. Not a dinner invite, not a call for reunion. It was an internal civil summons, a working session with both sides' attorneys, in a private conference room on the 3rd floor of the Copper Finch. No camera lenses, no online audience, just 4 walls, a few glasses of water, and air thick as a verdict. Elliot sat at the head of the table beside me, a stack of files in front of him. Across from us, Grant and Aubrey were neatly dressed, but the gloss was gone. Grant's suit no longer looked custom. Aubrey's dress looked like a rushed sale rack buy. Mason sat between them, head down. When they walked in, I didn't stand. I just checked the time. 10 o'clock sharp. "Thanks for being on time," I said evenly. "We're here to talk about debt." Grant drew a breath. "Mom, I've lost my job. I've lost everything. What more is there for?" "Thank you to take." I set a file on the table. "Oh, plenty. Here is the total I invested in you over the last 20 years. Tuition, weddings, down payments, cars, travel, and credit lines. Total, $1,280,000. I want it repaid." Aubrey scoffed, but the smile died when I slid a second sheet in front of her. Plus, compounded interest at 4.5% annually. The total to date is $1,790,000. The room went silent. Mason stammered, "Mom, we can't possibly pay that." I nodded lightly. "Exactly. Which is why you'll repay it in honor." Elliot opened the briefcase, took out 3 employment contracts, and placed one in front of each of them. Grant Caldwell, lead janitorial supervisor for the office division under Caldwell Holdings, 6 days a week, morning shift, $18 an hour. Aubrey Caldwell, evening prep cook at the Copper Finch, dishwashing and prep, $15 an hour. Mason Caldwell, maintenance and repairs for rental properties, full-time, $17 an hour. I enunciated every word, slowly, so no one could claim they misheard. These roles are not symbolic. Real work, real pay, standard policies like every other employee. You all report to your direct managers, not to me. Grant flushed and swallowed. "Are you trying to humiliate us?" I looked straight at him. "No, Grant. I'm offering you jobs, something a lot of people would beg for. If you feel humiliated, that's your self-respect talking." Aubrey tapped the table. "I can't believe you're doing this." You can refuse," I cut in. "Just sign the paper next to it, permanently waiving any inheritance, including the life insurance I've designated. I'll forward a copy to your attorney." No one spoke. Mason kept his head down. Only Elliot's pen clicked softly against the table, his signal that he was waiting. I went on. "You'll live in the worker housing complex in our system, on the east side. Single rooms, month-to-month leases. Each month, 70% of your wages will be deducted to repay the debt. If you complete 5 full years of continuous work, I'll forgive the remainder." Aubrey's mouth dropped. "That complex, that's for blue-collar workers." "That's right," I said, "because I think it's time you learned what labor feels like." I turned my chair, opened my laptop, and projected the final clause on the screen. Additional commitments. Permanent waiver of all inheritance rights to assets, shares, or distributions from Caldwell Holdings. Non-disparagement and no false statements about Iris Caldwell on any platform. Mandatory volunteer work at Evergreen Haven Senior Home, 2 sessions per week. Monthly reflective journals submitted to HR. Elliot handed each of them a printed copy. If any term is violated, all prior evidence recordings, texts, images, and transfer documents will be released to the press. Mason looked up, voice rough. "Mom, how long are you going to do this?" "Until you understand that respect isn't an inheritance," I said. "It's full-time work." Aubrey bowed her head, shoulders shaking. Grant's fists clenched. In his eyes I finally saw what I'd waited years to see: real shame. Not over lost status, but from realizing his self-respect had never been built on anything real. I said nothing more, just slid the pen box toward them. Elliot checked the time and said, "You have 30 minutes to sign. If not, we proceed to phase 2. Time dragged. The HVAC hummed overhead. The smell of fresh toner hung in the room. Everyone avoided each other's eyes. In the end, Mason picked up the pen first. He signed with a trembling hand, letters wobbling like he had no strength left. "Good," I said softly. "That's the first step of being an adult." Grant hesitated longer. He looked at Aubrey. She only lowered her face, tears spotting the contract. He finally grabbed the pen and signed quickly. Strokes sharp and forceful, like he needed to prove he still had agency. But when he finished, his eyes were red. Aubrey was last. She tried to wipe her tears, but her hand shook so much the ink smeared half a line. Elliot had to give her a fresh copy. When she was done, she looked up and asked, voice catching, "Who do you want us to become after all this?" "People who can bow without losing their dignity," I said. The door eased open. A gentle voice. "I'm sorry. May I join?" It was Tessa. She stood in the doorway holding a folder, still a little flustered, but her eyes steady. "I heard from Mason," she said, "and if he has to work, I want to volunteer with him at the senior home. Not because I have to, because I think it's the right thing." I studied the young woman for a long moment. In that stifling room, she was a soft breeze. I nodded. "All right, you don't need to sign anything. Your willingness is enough." Aubrey turned away, and Mason went still the first time I saw true gratitude in his eyes. When the paperwork was done, Elliot gathered the files into his case. I stood and looked at each of them. "Starting today, I'm not a bank, and I'm not a soft landing. I'm the steward of this family's honor." I walked slowly around the table, stopping behind Grant. "You used to think money was the measure of worth. Now you'll learn some debts are paid only in sweat." Then I looked at Aubrey. "As for you, daughter-in-law, maybe you'll learn no one is born beneath you. Only the contemptuous make themselves small." Finally, I rested my hand on Mason's shoulder. "And you, I don't need money from you. I need you to repay me by becoming a decent man." They sat still, 3 faces, 3 shades of guilt and contrition. I knew the road ahead would be long, but I also knew I'd done the right thing. Before I left, I turned back and spoke the last line, my voice low and final like a gavel. "From here on, Your Honor will pay the debt in place of my wallet." Elliot opened the door. Hallway lights spilled in, illuminating once proud faces now lowered. I stepped out, lighter not for winning, but for finally seeing justice show up not just in a courtroom, but at a family table that had forgotten gratitude. In the first week, HR reports hit my inbox on Monday morning. The sheet was short hours, output, minor violations, but to me, every line was a sign the lessons wheel had started to turn. Grant was assigned to office restrooms, the same halls he used to breeze past without a glance. Now he was cleaning the marble he once crossed in shiny Italian shoes. Elliot said on day 1, his back hurt so badly he had to sit in the hallway, hand at his hip, sweat soaking his blue uniform shirt, but he didn't abandon the shift. He cleaned slower, clumsier, but he cleaned. At the end of the shift, he asked security to buzz the door. The guard, the one Grant used to ignore when he was a bank manager, just nodded. For the first time, Grant bowed in a real greeting, not the curt nod of a corporate man. I know this. Learning to bow isn't failure. It's the beginning of standing up properly. As for Aubrey, the one who said, "McDonald's would suit you better," she's now an evening prep cook at the Copper Finch. I checked the internal cameras. Beige uniform, hair tied up, no makeup. Under neon kitchen lights, her skin glossed with oil and her eyes looked oddly tired. Elliot said by day 3 she ditched the makeup entirely. The grease made her foundation run in streaks. That night, a group of guests recognized her, probably golf club acquaintances. They filmed her washing dishes, snickering. 15 seconds. Caption: When the Ladies Club VP becomes Queen of Dishes. I watched it online and felt no joy. Humiliation is never a code. Lesson. Only awareness is real consequence. The next day, Elliot reported, Aubrey didn't call out. She arrived early, stood by the head chef, and learned portioning. She asked about shrinkage rates and wrote careful notes in a worn notebook. Maybe for the first time in her life, she understood the value of every slice of bread, every drop of oil on the floor. Mason worked maintenance at the rentals, a job people only notice when something breaks. The report read, Week 1 repaired 3 leaks, replaced 4th floor bulbs. I pictured my son, once parked in front of a screen, now curled under a sink, hands greasy with grit. Maybe for the first time, he understood leaks are like mistakes. If you don't patch them fast, they seep in and ruin the foundation. One evening, Elliot sent a cafeteria camera still from worker housing. Mason sat alone at a corner table, a simple bowl of soup in front of him. I zoomed in. His hands were rough, calloused, with a small cut wrapped in tape. I remembered how those hands were once too soft to twist open a bottle cap. Now they looked like mine back then. In week 2, the storm hit earlier than I expected. An old friend from the bank spotted Grant cleaning lobby glass on Monday morning. He snapped a photo and dropped it in the group chat. Branch manager turned janitor? Life really is a movie. It leaked and spread company-wide. I don't need to imagine how Grant felt. I know that feeling, being laughed at on the way down, because I've been there. The difference is, no one filmed me. Aubrey didn't escape either. A food blogger posted a clip of her washing dishes with a snide line, "Fine dining, now hiring former Ladies Club royalty talk about a palate cleanser." The comments boiled over. Karma. Serves her right. When real life is dessert. I read them all but didn't take them down. They need to learn that the world's cold stare can be harsher than any scolding from a mother. Mason was the only one not dragged online. He paid another way. Every day he fixed leaks, carried his toolbox, and grabbed a cheap street-side meal. A staffer reported he often sat in the back of the night shift kitchen, watching servers run plates, not with pity, but with a mix of curiosity and remorse. One night, when Aubrey cut her hand on a slipped knife, the person who ran to bandage her wasn't the head chef, it was Tessa. "I brought some bandages," Tessa said softly. "It's deep, but it'll heal." Aubrey looked at her and stayed quiet for a long time. Then she gave a small nod, lips moving like she wanted to say thank you but didn't know how to start. Maybe that was the first time she'd been treated kindly with no money or status involved. I didn't visit, and I didn't send messages. I just read the weekly management reports Elliot sent every Friday. He logged everything: hours, productivity, attitude, supervisor notes. I read every line and added no comments. I know feelings too soon can ruin rebirth. At first, other employees kept their distance. Then they began sharing night shift survival tips. Use vinegar to cut grease smell on your hands. Double knot trash bags to keep rats out. Share water when the heat gets bad. Small, ordinary things, but through them, my kids started learning the language of humility. By week 3, the air changed. Grant started greeting the guards by name, asking about their shifts. In his report, he wrote, "Didn't realize glass work could be this tiring. Now I get why people need a mid-shift break." Aubrey's HR journal was brief. "I thought I knew management. Turns out the first skill is listening. I'm learning to be quiet." After each repair, Mason left a note. "Pipe fixed. Thanks for the coffee. M." Staff pinned those slips to the internal board, reminders of small kindnesses. One morning, Elliot set a fresh report on my desk and smiled. "The gears are turning the right way, Iris." I looked out the window at the Ashley River flashing in the sun. "Right way isn't enough," I said. "They have to make the full turn." Elliot understood. He nodded and slipped out. I stayed with the files, feeling both calm and tender. I wasn't gloating. I was seeing the miracle of sweat, the thing people call dirty, but that washes away illusions. Outside, the sun was high. Somewhere in that light, my 3 children were still bent over their work. And I knew, slow as it was, late as it came, they were finally relearning how to be human, beginning with the calluses on their hands. Silver Pine's home sits on the city's northern edge, tucked in low hills of pine. That's where I chose for the 3 of them and Tessa to do their twice-weekly volunteer shifts. It's not too sad, but quiet enough to be a mirror. White-painted windows, weathered wooden benches, and the faint antiseptic smell, all of it makes an air only those who have grown old, who have waited, can truly understand. I didn't go with them. I read the weekly reports and journals, but Elliot, who often checked in, told me more than any line of text could. He said in week 1. Grant walked in fidgeting, like he was out of place. He wore his company uniform shirt, still crisp with the trace of expensive cologne, but when he saw Miss Renee in a wheelchair by the window holding an old photo frame, he stopped. "My daughter says she'll visit every spring," Miss Renee said, voice thin as thread. "It's been 3 years. I guess she's busy." No one answered. Grant just sat and looked out the window where pine needles fell in soft layers. Maybe in that moment he realized a mother's silence can last longer than winter. After that, he brought a chessboard. He played first with Mr. Hector, a retired math teacher, thin, sharp-eyed, voice like a blade. Elliot said Grant lost the first game clean. "Mr. Hector smiled kindly. "You're probably better at mopping than chess." Grant chuckled and scratched his head. Mr. Hector added, "Winning doesn't matter here, but don't keep your head down when you lose. Sometimes you have to look up to see the next move." It was the first time Grant lowered his head, not from shame, but to listen with his whole heart. Aubrey was assigned to the kitchen, preparing breakfast and dinner for nearly 50 residents. Simple work, but it takes care and patience. No fancy dishes, no banquet tables or crystal, just oatmeal, vegetable soup, and soft bread. On day 2, she made the oatmeal too thin, and Miss Margaret frowned, said it was bland. Aubrey went home, read recipes, tried again. Next morning she came an hour early, adjusted the porridge to individual portions, added a touch of almond milk and honey, fragrant but not cloying. When she served it, Miss Margaret tasted a spoonful and nodded. "Now that's good. You've got good kitchen hands, dear." A simple compliment. But Elliot said Aubrey stood still for a few seconds, eyes pink. She couldn't remember the last time anyone told her, "Good job." Maybe never. Mason handled repairs. He swapped bulbs, tightened door hinges, patched pipes, small, repetitive tasks that demand patience. One afternoon, while he was on a ladder changing a hallway bulb, an elderly woman shuffled over and put a hand on his leg. "Thank you, son," she said, voice trembling. "Without the light, I fall all the time." Mason stopped. He looked down at her kind, wrinkled face, and in that moment the word son rang like something he'd lost. He smiled faintly, eyes wet. That night he wrote in his journal, "If Mom were here, what would I do differently? Maybe just listen instead of fix." Tessa, as usual, went with Mason. But she didn't just help him. One day she proposed a call-hour program, video calls for families every weekend. "Not everyone can come," she said, "but at least they can see each other, even if it's only through a screen." The idea was approved, and Grant himself was the first to show Miss Renee how to use the phone. When her daughter's face appeared on the screen, probably in another city, buried in work, she burst into tears. "Is that you, honey? I thought you'd forgotten me." The staff recorded the video and shared it on social media. Within days, it spread everywhere. Thousands of warm comments poured in, and many people started visiting their loved ones more often. I watched that clip on a small screen, my heart both warm and aching. In the fourth week, Silver Pines had a sad night. Mr. Hector, the one who played chess with Grant, passed away in his sleep. Peaceful, as a chess game halted mid-move. When Elliot called to tell me, I was silent for a long time. I knew that death would leave a mark not just in a medical file, but in the hearts of the young people who were just learning to cherish presence. The next day, my 3 children and Tessa stood by his empty bed. They didn't speak, they just stood there for a long time. Grant set the unfinished chessboard back in place. Aubrey brought the bowl of oatmeal he liked, and Mason tightened the loose bolt on the bed frame. No one asked them to do it. But small acts were their way of saying goodbye. That evening, they returned to their shifts, fewer words, steadier work. No complaints, no excuses. Only the sound of running water, the scrape of brooms, and even breathing in the quiet air. Elliot called me, his voice low. Maybe they've started to understand the price of absence. I didn't answer. I just opened the email with 3 small attachments, their individual reflection journals. I read in silence. Grant wrote, "When Mr. Hector blundered a piece. I went to fix the board, but he said, 'Don't. Leave it.' In life, you don't have to correct every bad move. Maybe you thought the same when you watched us mess up in silence." Aubrey wrote, "I used to think people cooked oatmeal out, think of duty. Now I know a spoon of oatmeal can be the last love note. I'm afraid of the day I have to cook for someone who can't eat anymore." Mason wrote, "Someone called me son today. My hands were dirty, but my heart felt cleaner than ever." My hand trembled by the end. Between the messy lines, I saw the first cracks in their armor of pride. Those cracks for me were worth more than any apology. I folded the journals and put them in a drawer. That night I wrote a short letter to Silver Pines, unsigned. Inside the envelope was just a check and a note. 4 new beds for those waiting for a place to be loved a second time. When Elliot took the task to deliver it, he asked, "Should I put your name on it?" I shook my head. No, some of the best things don't need an audience. Then I looked out the window. The evening light tilted through the trees, golden and soft like a day's last breath. I thought of Silver Pines, of the souls who had lived, the hearts learning to love, and my children now quietly becoming human again amid antiseptic air and the gentle laughter of old age. 3 months after their first volunteer shift at Silver Pines, I decided to do what I'd avoided for years: invite my children to dinner. No special reason, no birthday, no anniversary, just a simple meal where people who'd been broken could sit together without playing roles. I prepared everything myself. No lavish spread, no pricey wine like the parties they used to throw. On the table were roast chicken, a salad, and sweet cornbread, 3 dishes I made in our poorest years when we crowded around a little wooden table in a cramped apartment. When they arrived, all 3 stood awkwardly in the doorway like guests unsure they were welcome. Tessa came with them, holding a bunch of wild daisies. She stepped in first, her voice soft as a breath. "May I help set the table?" I smiled. "Of course, dear." My kitchen glowed warm under yellow light. No music, just the clink of a ladle on a pot and a hint of butter and garlic in the air. I saw Grant glance around. His eyes landed on the family photo on the wall, taken at a Charleston park 20 years ago when they were small. He walked over, touched the wooden frame, then came back and sat down quietly. When everything was set, I poured plain water into glass tumblers, no lemon, no ice. The table was quiet, just the sound of carving chicken and the cornbread's sweet smell hanging in the air. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. I let it be. Silence is a language, too. Grant broke it first. He set down his knife and took a long breath. "Mom," he began, voice rough. "I've been thinking a lot. I was afraid people would laugh at where I came from. I wanted to prove I was good enough, polished enough, so they'd forget who I am, that I'm the son of a woman who cleaned rooms." He gave a small, dry laugh and stared at his calloused hands. "Turns out, the more I tried to deny you, the more I erased the best part of myself." I said nothing. I just looked at him for the first time in years. My eldest wasn't avoiding my eyes or puffing himself up with pride. He was just a man learning to tell the truth. Aubrey sat next to him, hands clenched together. She looked toward the window, then spoke slowly. "I'm afraid of being poor, Mom. I grew up in a house where money was always short. I swore I'd never go back to that, so when I finally had a little, I clutched it until I turned mean." Her voice shook, eyes wet. "I thought money meant safety, but really, it just made me more afraid." I listened, feeling both ache and relief. Maybe this was the first time she'd been honest without fear of judgment. Then Mason lifted his head, eyes bright but tired. "I'm afraid of confrontation," he said. "My whole life I've avoided conflict. When Grant and Aubrey spoke, I stayed quiet. I thought silence kept the peace, but really I took the wrong side. And I know that hurt you." In his eyes I saw a different man, fewer words, more depth. Maybe those afternoons at Silver Pines taught him what took me a lifetime to learn. Silence can be a sin too. I set down the ladle and didn't answer with words. Forgiveness has never been about saying, "I'm not mad." If it's real, you feel it in actions. I stepped away from the table and turned on the tap. "Dinner's done," I said evenly. "Who wants to help me with the dishes?" Grant looked up, then stood first. "I will." Aubrey followed, rolling up her sleeves. Mason smiled slightly. "I'll dry this time." Tessa laughed soft and warm. We stood around the sink and split the work. Grant washed, Aubrey rinsed, Mason dried, and I put things away. No one bossed anyone. The water ran, plates clinked gently. A simple moment, but my heart warmed in a way I hadn't felt in years. The real family meal wasn't on the table. It was here, where everyone cleaned up together. When we finished, I dried my hands and looked at each of them. "If you want to stop early," I said, "you have my permission. Consider the lesson learned." Grant didn't hesitate. "No, Mom. I want to finish the year." Aubrey nodded. "Me too. Not because of the contract, because I need to see this through," Mason said quietly. "I think we still have a lot to learn." I stood there looking at the three of them. Their clothes still smelled like dish soap, their hands still rough. But in their eyes I saw what I'd waited for my whole life, the light of understanding. We ended the dinner without tears or grand promises. Just handshakes, awkward hugs, and a "see you next week, Mom." I walked them to the door. After their silhouettes slipped under the streetlights, I stood for a long time, listening to the night wind move through the trees. Back in the kitchen, the sink was empty, the dishes stacked neatly, a little steam still rising from the stainless steel. I sat down and exhaled, not a weary sigh, but the sound of someone putting down the last heavy load. That night I went to bed without reading the news or checking my phone. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the light rain outside. For the first time in years I slept well, not because I felt safe, but because I knew my children, however lost they'd been, had started walking back toward decency. I dreamed of the old kitchen, the wooden table, and 3 little kids laughing around a plate of roast chicken. I heard my own voice in the dream, light as a breeze, "Eat up before it gets cold." And in that sleep I realized the real family table isn't set with gold, it's set with the truth. From August through December, the city slid into crisp sunlight, and I realized it wasn't just the street trees turning over. My 3 children were shedding old skins too. It wasn't flashy change, but the steady kind, like a factory rhythm or the slow breathing of someone waking from a long sleep. Grant, the son who used to sit behind a conference table with a tight tie and a voice tuned to authority, now wakes at 5 a.m. He still works the cleaning shift at Caldwell Holdings' main building, but stays after to study lodging management in a program for working adults. Reports say he brings a book to lunch, sits on the stairwell, eats a sandwich, and takes notes. One morning, Elliot sent me a sneaky phone shot. Grant standing in the grand lobby, teaching new staff how to polish glass with the light, not against it. His shirt was splashed with water, but his smile was bright. Beneath the photo, Elliot wrote one line, "People are relearning leadership from the lowest rung." I printed it and tucked it into my work notebook without telling anyone. Aubrey enrolled in a community culinary program with morning classes. She still works the evening prep shift at the Copper Finch, but now she knows how to hold a ladle, set heat, and keep quiet when corrected. Elliot said the head chef told him, "She's not afraid of hot oil anymore. I'd call that growth." In October, the restaurant ran an in-house contest. Each staffer cooked a Southern soul dish their way. Aubrey entered with a healthier gumbo, less oil, no butter, more vegetables and natural spices, tailored for seniors. When she heard I was sponsoring the contest, she looked flustered, but cooked with rare focus. Her gumbo won first prize, not for technique, for honesty and flavor. Asked how she felt. She said, "I used to think cooking was for servants. Now I know it's how people show love without words." The local paper quoted her, "No one brought up the old scandal. They only knew a woman learning to hold a ladle instead of a business card." Mason, the once weak younger son, surprised me most. His maintenance work now extends beyond worker housing. He built a standardized maintenance log, step by step for every device, with QR codes so staff can scan and timestamp completions. Elliot printed the plan and rolled it out across all Caldwell Holdings sites. Elliot said, "I've never seen him this confident. He doesn't keep his head down anymore unless he's measuring a pipe." In November, a resident in a high-rise he oversees gave him a hand-drawn sketch of a new streetlight, one Mason installed, casting just enough glow for seniors to walk safely at night. Under it was a scrawled line, "Thanks for making my block safer." Elliot brought the drawing to my office. I studied it and smiled. The boy finally understands usefulness is the most honorable degree. The internal reports I get each week have grown shorter. No complaints, just clean lines. Morning shift finished 20 minutes early. No safety violations. Performance at 108%. They're even volunteering for tougher shifts early mornings. Overnights. Weekends. Elliot asked why. Grant said, "I want to learn every corner of your system." Aubrey said, "I want to stay in the kitchen when the restaurant's quiet. That's when I can hear myself." Mason just smiled. "I like the sound of pipes running steady. Makes me feel useful." I read those lines and felt warm, not proud. Exactly at peace. By year's end, Elliot came to my place with a proposal. Grant meets the threshold for the management cohort. I want him to run the third floor of the main office for 3 months. If he does well, we can bump him to shift supervisor. I was quiet for a few seconds. I've always believed power should follow responsibility. Now I think maybe trust is what teaches responsibility. I nodded. "Do it. I won't interfere." Elliot smiled. "You're practicing letting go?" I said. "Yeah. If I keep a grip forever, I'm no different than they were." In December, I went to the Copper Finch, not to supervise, but to eat. Aubrey handled the main course that day. When the gumbo came out, she stood at the pass and smiled at me. "What do you think, Mom?" I tasted a spoonful. A soft heat, balanced salt, shrimp, and celery coming through. "It's good," I said, "not because you seasoned well, but because you cooked with your heart." She smiled, tears slipping down and mixing with the sweat on her brow. Mason stayed in the field. This time, he was assigned to inspect newer buildings. He texted me a selfie, him by the lamppost he'd installed, sunset washing over a red brick facade. I saved the photo but didn't reply. Sometimes silence is the compliment. When Grant finished his course, the school sent me a thank you note. Said he was one of their most diligent, collaborative students. At the end was a line, recommended for an internal scholarship for the advanced level. I folded the letter and didn't tell him. I wanted him to hear it from the school because opening your own envelope is better than any praise. As for me, while they changed careers, I changed how I lived. I started delegating operations to Elliot and the younger managers. For the first time in years, I took a weekend day without checking numbers or making calls. I walked along the Ashley River, had coffee at a small cafe, and watched older couples hold hands. Turns out, it wasn't just them learning how to live again, I was learning how to let go. Talk shows called, wanting me to speak about a comeback from scandal. I turned most of them down. I said yes to one not to retell the past, but to talk about invisible labor, the small, quiet jobs society undervalues: janitors, prep cooks, maintenance. I said on air, no one sees them, but they keep the whole world running. I was just lucky enough to relearn that lesson not from school, but from my own children. That interview replayed over and over. But what moved me most was an email I got the next morning, just a few lines, signed by Grant. Mom, I watched it. I get it now. Thank you for giving us the chance to start over. I stared at those words for a long time. Outside, winter light lay over the city, cold but clear. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt as light as a first breath of the day. Our story was no longer a scandal. It had become a small guide for anyone who'd forgotten the value of work, of family, and of knowing how to begin again. And I knew the journey wasn't over, but at least the wheel was finally turning the right way, and this time I didn't have to push it alone. That year's end, when winter wind began to slip through every door crack, I looked at Caldwell Holdings' year-end summary and saw something I'd never seen before. 3 words, honor repaid, typed in the very last note line. Not an accounting term, but a private marker of mine for people paying back a debt money could never measure. Grant, Aubrey, and Mason, each in their own way, had started repaying parts of the 20-year tab I'd listed in the agreement. Not with envelopes or transfers from me, but with their actual wages and bonuses. Every month, finance sent me a breakdown, 3 small amounts taken evenly from their income sent straight to the Second Sunrise Fund. The numbers weren't huge, a few hundred, then slowly a few thousand, but steady, never a day late. Elliot called it the honor repayment. I called it my family's new breath. I didn't just watch them, I changed too. Second Sunrise, my heart's project, began expanding into 3 neighboring states, Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. From a few temporary apartments, we added a network of volunteer attorneys and job reentry programs for seniors. When Elliot asked who should run community outreach, I didn't need to think. I called Tessa. Would you help me with something? I asked. Tell me what you need. From now on, you'll stand in the middle of stories that haven't been rewritten yet. I trust you to listen without judgment. Tessa was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I'll do it if you'll let me call you Mom Iris. I laughed, and tears fell before I could speak. Maybe it's quiet kindness that finally softens an old heart like mine. Grant was in a different phase. After almost a year of training, he asked to try managing 2 mid-range hotels in our system, not a flashy brand, no stars on a ratings board, but steady occupancy. I don't want to look fancy anymore, he said in our meeting. I want to do it right. I studied the packet he'd prepared, every little item spelled out, cleaning protocols, shift schedules, staff training. No more lines about boosting profit by cutting staff. Like the old days. Hotels don't need to sparkle, I told him. They need guests who want to come back. He nodded. Now I get why you started with a broom. If you know what a clean floor takes, you can keep a whole building standing. When he left, I watched him go, my son's silhouette no longer arrogant, but steady, like a man who'd learned to walk on his own strength. Aubrey had a new start too. After last year's cook-off, she was officially promoted to lunch sous chef at the Copper Finch, in charge of menus for seniors and folks recovering from illness. I stopped by one noon. From a distance, I saw her in a white uniform, hair neatly tied, talking to staff. When she noticed me, she paused, dipped her head slightly, and waved me in. "Would you like to try the new dish?" "Brown rice porridge with salmon and dill." I nodded. It was simple and thoughtful, not flashy, but every spoonful tasted warm and calm. She said, "I'm not afraid of the kitchen anymore. Every day I walk in here, I feel a little less selfish." I looked at her, my heart settling. No praise needed. I just touched her shoulder and said, "Thank you for staying." And Mason, he kept maintenance, but now as technical supervisor over all our rental housing. This time, he wasn't just fixing pipes or bulbs. He trained younger techs to check electrical systems and keep proper logs. One November afternoon, Mason came by with a small box. Inside was a card in his familiar handwriting. "Mom, Tessa and I are engaged. We want a small ceremony, no backdrop, no name placards. Just family." I set the card down, feeling like an old wound had finally healed. "All right," I said. "This time I'll just be a guest." The wedding was in early December, in the small garden behind Silver Pine's home. It was cold, but the sun was soft and warm. No extravagant flowers, no noise, just people who truly wanted to witness. I invited the director of Silver Pines and a few residents who knew Mason and Tessa. They sat in the front row beside a row of empty chairs where I placed a small sign, "For those who are gone, but never absent." Those seats were for Miss Renee, for Mr. Hector, and for my own mother who taught me there's no debt larger than a moral one. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Grant and Aubrey stood at their sides, best man and maid of honor. When the music started, I looked at my 3 children and saw faces once cold, now warm, hands that once pushed me away, now holding tight to one another. When Mason slipped the ring on Tessa's finger, he said, "We won't promise never to be wrong, just not to stay silent when we are." Hearing that, my eyes stung because it sounded like a late answer to all the years silence had hurt me. After the ceremony, I invited everyone back to my place. On the old wooden table, I laid out 3 envelopes. "Before we celebrate, I want to share something," I said. Inside was a codicil, an updated add-on to my will. I made it clear, the bulk of my estate still goes to Second Sunrise, but each of you will receive an opportunity, not cash. Grant would get to run one of the 2 hotels in recovery. Aubrey would own 10% of the Copper Finch, not as a gift, but as a reward for real work. And Mason, I turned over to him the project to redesign worker housing into a community complex, a project named Hector's Light, in memory of the gentleman who taught Grant chess and our family patience. No one argued. No one asked for more. They each signed, hands shaky but firm. Grant said, "We understand now. Money can buy comfort, but only opportunity builds trust." I nodded, unable to hide a smile. That night, after everyone left, I tidied my old kitchen. The white walls were a bit stained, but the light was as warm as the first day I walked in. I opened the wooden cabinet where I'd kept the only thing I never threw away, a rag. It was worn thin, stitched over and over. Every stitch was a piece of my life. Years of housekeeping, nights scrubbing floors, quiet mornings at the sink to feed my kids. I set it on the table and ran a hand over it. Not to cling to hardship, but to thank the days that made me strong enough to stand. I looked out the window. City lights shimmered like 1,000 stars. I whispered, my voice lost in the wind, "Mom, I did it." Outside, the cold wind kept blowing. But in my small kitchen, everything was warm, warm like our first family meal, like working hands, and like honor repaid with sweat, not tears. 5 years after that night at the Copper Finch, My life felt like a new chapter, quieter, warmer, full of things I once thought lived only in books. Everything had changed, but none of us forgot that night when a fancy dinner table became the place we upended the order of kinship. Now, the Copper Finch carries a name I adore: Second Chance Kitchen. It isn't a marketing flourish, but a tribute to people pushed to the margins, fired, hurt, written off as useless. The restaurant prioritizes hiring them, training them, and giving them a restart. Inside, on the red brick wall, hangs a small bronze plaque. I wrote, "Dignity is the house special here." I see it every time I stop by, and I always smile. Grant now runs 2 mid-range Caldwell Holdings hotels with a steady hand. Not a luxury chain, no stars on some list, but guests keep coming back, staff stay longer, and folks call him something simple: Mr. Caldwell, the boss who knows how to mop floors. He's not embarrassed by it. In fact, he tells the staff he started with a broom, and the broom taught him respect. Once he called me, voice rough with emotion, "I think I finally understand leadership, Mom. It's being the one who clears the path, not the one who stands in front." I said, "Good. Keep that and you won't lose your way again." Aubrey is now head of the lunch program at the Copper Finch, overseeing the entire menu for older guests. She just won a Charleston Local Star Award for a vegetable soup made from safely repurposed trim food that's not just good, but frugal and kind. At the ceremony, she said, "I used to think cooking was for people to praise me. Now I just want folks to feel lighter when they're done eating." I stood in the hall and didn't speak, just clapped, slow and steady. Each clap softened an old burn between me and my daughter-in-law. Mason now leads a technical crew named Respect Crew. Their motto, printed on their shirts, "Fix things, mend people." He says that every time he repairs something, he remembers old mistakes and realizes the thing that needs fixing isn't the pipe, it's a heart once hardened by fear. He and Tessa have been married 3 years, living near the river where the water taps the shore. They don't need wealth, just calm. On weekends, they go to Silver Pines to teach seniors how to use smartphones, so no one has to wait forever for a call that never comes. As for me, I started writing my first book, titled Mopping Hours Pay Dividends. It isn't a memoir, it's the lessons I gathered across a lifetime, from the smell of floor cleaner, from stifled laughter, and from getting back up after being looked down on. It's about how perseverance becomes life capital, the kind you can't measure in dollars, but that earns interest in dignity. All profits go to Second Sunrise. The fund has expanded to 7 cities, helping hundreds of seniors find shelter and retrain for work. When the media ask why I don't keep some for myself, I just smile, because I have enough. What I receive now isn't in a savings account, it's in the gratitude in people's eyes. My family keeps a small tradition. A monthly dinner everyone must attend, no matter how busy. Nothing fancy, nothing fussy, just the old table in my kitchen. The set dish is Silver Pines-style chicken soup, the recipe Aubrey learned for folks with tender teeth. Every time the ladle rises, celery and pepper drift into the air, and the kitchen becomes a room holding both memory and forgiveness. Tonight, at our December dinner, Grant lifted his glass of water and said, "I never thought I'd sit here." "Again, Mom." I figured some cracks never mend. I looked around the table at familiar faces now, with more lines and more light in the eyes. I set the ladle down and said gently, "They don't always mend, son. But we can plant flowers in them. When they bloom, people call it dawn." They fell quiet, then smiled. No promises were made, just warmth passing around the table. That night, after I walked them to the door, I knew it was time to let the last thing in me drift away. I went back to the kitchen, dried my hands, and said softly, not to anyone else, just to myself, "I forgive you, not because I forgot, but because my children have changed." One morning at year's end, Elliot, now retired, stopped by. He stepped in with his usual gentle smile, carrying a small object wrapped in cloth. "Do you remember this?" he asked, unwrapping it. In his hand was the old key to the first Caldwell Holdings office, the key I used every day back when I hid behind the scenes, the cleaning lady in plain sight. The key was rusty, the head nicked, yet under the sunlight it shone a soft silver. "I think it belongs to you," Elliot said. "This key opened more than one door." I took it and held on tight. "Thank you," I said, "but really, you're the one who kept it from rusting." He smiled and left me with the artifact of an entire journey. I stared at it for a long time, then hung it on the wall of my new office, right under the old bronze plaque. "Dignity is the house special here." Now, as I write this, the sky is getting light. The first birds of morning are calling outside. My life, once late afternoon, seems to have another dawn, not dazzling, but warm and true. If this story touched you, I genuinely want to know who I'm speaking to. Tell me where you're watching from. Every line you share, every comment, is a heartbeat linking people who've walked through the dark. Who knows, your words might reach someone who needs a second sunrise in their life, and if you feel this journey is worth it, leave a small sign, a like, a subscribe, or simply a hello. They're all ways to let me know stories about grit, forgiveness, and new beginnings are still being heard. Thank you for staying to the very last lines. Your presence, quiet and warm, is the greatest gift to a storyteller like me. I stand up and turn off the kitchen lights. I leave only the oven light on, a soft glow like a breath, a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. Dawn once more,